These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Plexiderm, real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. Gabby takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at gabby.com/Tom. HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at hellofresh.com, code TOM. And Superbeats, heart chews for heart healthy energy. More info at superbeatsradio.com/Tom.
Our book for the Thom Hartmann Book Club today is A Nation Forged by Crisis, A New American History by Jay Sexton. And I'm reading from the introduction. This is page 9. The quest for national security and global power, America's shifting position in the international economy, and fluctuations in immigration have made the United States the nation that it is today. Americans' foreign relations have been conditioned its history not only in their cumulative effects over the long haul, but also as a result of their volatility. In periods of crisis, America's position in the world has lurched in unexpected directions. For as inexorable as the rise of the United States appears in retrospect, there have been contingent moments in which the very existence of our nation was up for grabs. This is the essence of crisis. The world turned upside down, the known replaced by the unknown, panic reigning as people struggle to maintain their balance and shifts in the very ground beneath their feet. It came with a speed and ferocity that left men dazed, New York Times correspondent Elliot Bell wrote of Wall Street's catastrophic collapse in October of 1929. Quote, the market seemed like an insensate thing that was wreaking a wild and pitiless revenge upon those who thought to master it, end quote. Crises are contagious, spreading like viruses from one realm to another. It's not without reason that the word crisis was associated with medical conditions and health scares in the 19th century. Each of the periods under consideration in this book were less a singular crisis than a set of interlinked crises. A political crisis could trigger an economic panic, which in turn could intensify social conflict, and so on. As these pandemics spread through the body politic, crisis itself was normalized, becoming an almost accepted characteristic of an age. Just as foreign crises have spread to the United States, domestic ones have spilled across its borders, unsettling foreign countries and peoples, as well as reconfiguring America's connections to the world. Consider the fateful winter of secession that followed the 1860 election of Abraham Lincoln. The crisis over slavery that divided the Union into warring sections that led to a series of sharp reversals in America's position in the global system. The foreign capital that had rushed into the roaring American economy in the preceding decades suddenly began to flee. Indeed, more capital left the United States in 1860 to 1862 than came into it. Also a once-in-a-century occurrence. One of the world's most valuable commodities and America's largest exports, Southern cotton, was confined to the ports of the Confederacy as a result of Richmond's ill-fated diplomatic strategy, leading to unemployment and social unrest in the British textile town of Lancashire. The most unexpected reversal was how the national security that the United States had attained after the war against Mexico in the 1840s was suddenly imperiled, with European powers encroaching once again upon the Western Hemisphere. Meanwhile, the Confederate emissaries across the Atlantic were in search of alliance with Britain. Our country, Secretary of State William Seward lamented in early 1861, after having expelled all European powers from the continent, now threatened to relapse into an aggravated form of its colonial experience, and like India, Turkey, China, and Italy, become the theater of transatlantic intervention and rapacity. A wider view of American history that looks beyond the nation's borders brings into focus not only the migration patterns, economic flows, and international rivalries that have connected the United States to the world, but also those rare moments in which the very existence of the nation was in question. Perhaps none was more pregnant with implications than the autumn of 1877, when the fate of the Patriots' bid for independence hung in the balance. Having proclaimed their independence to the world the previous 4th of July, their cause had stalled on the battlefield and in the diplomatic courts of the old world. I think the game is pretty near up, Washington privately confessed at year's end. To accomplish their independence is not quite so easy as to declare it, the British philosopher Jeremy Bentham haughtily remarked. But then a series of events forever changed the course of modern history. The stunning Patriot victory at the Battle of Saratoga in October, the drafting of the Articles of Confederation in November that, for all its limitations, further demonstrated the political resolve of the Americans. And most of all, the alliance signed with France in February 1778, which provided the Patriots with the resources, military assistance, and naval power that ultimately tipped the scales in their favor. There are comparable Saratoga moments in other crises in U.S. history, as we shall see. These contingent moments played out in their own distinctive ways, but are joined by a common denominator that has been curiously forgotten in our age of U.S. global power. Foreign states and people have played decisive roles in the critical moments of American history. As we make our way through our own era of global instability, in an unprecedentedly interconnected world, there's perhaps no more important lesson from the past to keep in mind. Crisis may beget crisis, Franklin Roosevelt said, as his administration transitioned from battling the Great Depression to entering the Second World War. But the progress underneath does not wholly halt. It does go forward, end quote. Like so many of Roosevelt's public statements, this one reveals a truth even as it conceals others. The United States came out on the other side of its greatest crises as a stronger and more efficiently organized nation, as Roosevelt suggested. The process of mobilizing resources to counter threats catalyzed innovations in political economy, such as the creation of a national financial system during the Civil War, and the economic reforms of the New Deal. The book is A Nation Forged by Crisis by Jay Sexton.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy Monday. A lot going on in the world today. Joe Madison is going to join us in our second hour and, for a conversation about what his listeners on SiriusXM's Urban View channel and my listeners here on the Progressive channel are talking about, with regard to everything that's going on right now. It's just bizarre. But I want to start off with a rant that kind of follows a piece that I published over at ThomHartmann.medium.com this morning, which is where I'm posting most of my writing now. And it's about how basically everybody's talking about the FBI is trying to track down the people who were in the Capitol, and we just busted this guy, and where's this guy, and all that, and that's all well and good. And I think it's actually very, very important. If people are not held accountable for what they did, they'll do it again. I mean, this is why we have laws. It's why you put bank robbers in jail, because you don't want them to rob more banks. I mean, this is not rocket science, but the principal media narrative that I'm getting and that I caught on the weekend shows and things like that was that this is a bunch of, quote, right-wing crazies, end quote. And I want to get into this a little bit. I think that what they're missing, what we're all missing, frankly, and the biggest story here that the media is completely ignoring because they have some complicity in this, is why did these people show up in Washington, D.C.? And no, I'm not talking about Ginny Thomas, Clarence Thomas's wife, whose organization apparently paid for like 80 busloads, or Charlie Kirk, the young right-wing guy who helped fund these buses to bring people into the Capitol. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about all the press, but just engage in a thought exercise with me for a moment. Just you and me. Just imagine this. Try to put yourself in this future world, 4 years down the road. Kamala Harris is running for president. Joe Biden has said, okay, I'm 80 years old. I'm going to retire. Kamala Harris, my vice president, she's done a great job. She's going to run for president. And, sort of like Lyndon Johnson saying, no, I'm not going to run for a second term. I'm going to let Hubert Humphrey do it. And Kamala Harris runs. And on the Republican side, it's Tom Cotton, Senator Tom Cotton. And it's November, it's the day after the election, and CNN and Fox News are congratulating Tom Cotton on his victory. Secretaries of State from all over the country, but in particular from a half a dozen swing states, are all reporting that Tom Cotton carried their states, even states that are typically voting Democratic. Tom Cotton carried those states that went for Joe Biden in a big way back in 2000. We're in 2024 right now. But on MSNBC, the commentators and the reporters are talking about election irregularities in those states. Kamala Harris's victory, they're saying, was stolen from her by operatives and sleazoids in these states who are flipping votes, hiding ballots, stuffing ballot boxes, manipulating electronic voting machines, and they have the evidence. They have video, they have witnesses, and it's just not. And it's not just that. You've got more than half, 57% of the Democrats in the U.S. House of Representatives are agreeing with this and saying, yeah, it sure looks to me like this election was stolen by Tom Cotton and that Kamala Harris actually won. 57% of the Democrats are saying that. More than a dozen Democratic senators, being led by Chuck Schumer, are saying the election, the 2024 election, was stolen from Kamala Harris by Tom Cotton, or might have been. We need to investigate this in the House and Senate. We need to pass legislation. Before we even certify Tom Cotton as president, we need to pass legislation investigating this. And maybe we shouldn't even certify him as president. And while the New York Times and the Washington Post are congratulating Tom Cotton on winning and saying that when Joe Biden and Kamala Harris say the election was stolen from them, that they're lying, the progressive websites, The Guardian, The Daily Kos, The Democratic Underground, Raw Story, Alternate, Common Dreams, Op-Ed News, all the rest of them, they're all laying out chapter and verse of how Kamala Harris's presidency was stolen from her by Republican operatives in a half a dozen swing states. And the billionaire donors who were behind that theft, the billionaire Republican donors who helped Tom Cotton steal the election. You turn to Facebook, where you've just been reading about your friends and family and keeping touch with Aunt Sally. And suddenly you're seeing, because of the Facebook algorithm, you're seeing, the few friends that you thought were, rational, politically rational, saying, oh my God, the Republicans stole the election. Kamala Harris is supposed to be president, but Tom Cotton is about to be inaugurated. We got to do something. And you're like, whoa, wait a minute. All these people are saying this? You go to Twitter. And because of that platform's algorithm, suddenly your Twitter feed is filled with people saying, the Republicans stole the election. And this horrible truth dawns on you, as pretty much every news source that you trust is telling you that the election was stolen by the Republicans, by Tom Cotton. Kamala Harris is the rightful president of the United States, but she's not going to be sworn in. Something terrible is going on. Even the New York Times and the Washington Post are quoting Democratic senators like Chuck Schumer and the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, as saying, yeah, this was a stolen election, or most likely, or maybe. In fact, it's a coup attempt. It's an attempt to utterly destroy America. Done by a bunch of bought-off Republicans who want to put Tom Cotton in the White House. And the fact that he's not the legitimate winner is now, to you, becoming obvious. And our country is in danger. That's obvious to you. So what do you do? I mean, in 1860, when traitors tried to seize America, good Americans took up arms. In 1776, when the British locked down Boston, the people of Boston committed a $1 million act of vandalism, the Boston Tea Party, and then declared war. We took up arms in 1776. We celebrate that every year on the 4th of July. You drive home and the talk show host that you regularly listen to, say it's me, is saying this election was stolen from Kamala Harris by Republicans and Tom Cotton. This is a coup. We've got to do something. And again, the majority of the Democrats in Congress are saying the same thing. What do you do? Isn't fighting back, isn't saving the nation your patriotic duty? Now, I'm not saying this to give any kind of excuse at all to the people who committed vandalism and broke into the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. I'm saying this to point out that without Republican members of Congress like Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley, without Democratic members of Congress from Kevin McCarthy on down, without Fox News and One America News and Newsmax and the other right-wing television networks, without literally hundreds of right-wing radio talk show hosts across the country, and without the algorithms of Facebook and Twitter absolutely convincing many of the people in this country, the majority of Republicans now, something like 80% of Republicans, about 46%, I believe, of Americans overall, convincing them that the election was stolen by Biden, that those are the real villains. They're the ones who need to be held to account also. Obviously, people who broke into the Capitol need to go to jail. But they're just the tip of the iceberg. There's this whole movement, and what created that movement? These politicians and this media infrastructure. And they need to be held accountable. What say you?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be right back. It's 15 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Let's see here. David in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Hey, David, what's up?
Yeah, Tom. Yeah, I got a couple of theories I've been thinking about and listening to you over the weeks you discuss things, kind of like the United States. It's an empire. Let's look at it in this term. The United States is an empire. The Roman Empire was an empire. The Greeks was an empire. And the basic problem with those two empires that I just mentioned, the Greeks and the Romans, they destroyed themselves from within by greed, misrepresenting to the people what they wanted to do. And the big money people of those empires destroyed themselves from within. And theoretically, I think if we continue down this path we're on right now, like Plato and Socrates said, we're going to destroy ourselves from within unless we can figure out.
Well, Socrates actually participated in that. He participated in the revolution of the 400, or was it 300, and the revolution of the 40 or the 30, the elite one. And but Socrates had never been a fan of democracy. He was very skeptical of it. Plato, but I get your point. I don't think that we are the Roman Empire, and I think to the extent that America is empire, that's not what is driving this process. That's one of the things that has corrupted this country. That's one of the reasons why we spend more on defense than the next 10 countries combined. That's one of the reasons why our jobs have vanished and gone to other countries. There's a whole lot to say about American empire, but American empire was just as real 10 years ago or 15 years ago when we elected Barack Obama as it is today. This is not that. No. This is treason.
Well, the other thing you got to look at is our police force and stuff like that. You got to look at our police force and what they're doing too. I mean, they're part of the Centurion, and the Roman Guard is the military. Those are the two things we got to. The U.S. military is the Roman Guard. They're the extension of the empire. David, if you want to look at the history of Rome, then and look for parallels. The parallel is Caesar Augustus.
Augustus was the guy who came to power and basically ended any semblance of democracy or of Rome being a republic, and turned it into not just an empire, but a brutal empire ruled by a single man.
Right.
And there's a great book about this that we had the author on about a year ago, and I had a copy of it that I could on my desk, but it's I've been moving my books around, and so I'm sorry that I don't have the title right off the top of my head, but I'm sure if you search for recent history, it just came out in the last year, and it's something like Fragile Empire, and it's just brilliant. But really, it was a megalomaniac leader that took down Rome, and that's the concern that people have, I think, about Donald Trump. David, thank you for the call. I don't think we need to look for ancient historical analogs. I think there's plenty of recent historical analogs that we can look at. We'll be right back. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. There's so much news coming out of the Trump administration, so much corruption, so many crimes. Now they're letting people kill endangered species. Now they're selling off, the Arctic National Wildlife Preserve refuge to big oil companies. Now they're they're authorizing pesticides that we know cause birth defects and damage to children. It's just step after step after step that it's so easy to forget that back in July of 2020 it was reported that Jared Kushner and Mike Pence's nephew, John Pence, created a couple of LLCs, American-Made Media Consultants Corporation, that took $617 million of Trump campaign cash, and nobody knows where it went. I'm telling you, these guys are professional grifters. We need to keep an eye on it. There's a whole rant about it over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Make no mistake, these guys who attacked the Capitol, some of them were absolutely bent from all the reporting that we can see and their own social media on, at the very least, this was like a repeat of the dry run that they did in Michigan with Gretchen Whitmer, of kidnapping Nancy Pelosi, Mike Pence, Chuck Schumer, maybe Mitch McConnell. I don't know. Mitch McConnell has done a good job of kind of staying out of the way of all of this by by just letting the conspiracy theories roll and not pushing back on them. But certainly Speaker Pelosi and Mike Pence, they were carrying zip ties into the White House, handcuffs, plastic handcuffs. They were, there were people ready to kill. There were people ready to kidnap. They had a gallows outside. There were people ready to hold a mock trial. They planned to do all this in Michigan. They planned to do all this in D.C. Lynn Wood, one of Trump's lawyers, a pro-Trump lawyer, he's no longer one of Trump's lawyers, he tweeted, "Get the firing squads ready, Pence goes first." Now, if this mob had killed even one or captured even one member of Congress, which was clearly the mission that some of them were committed to, then the law would have allowed Donald Trump to suspend habeas corpus like Abraham Lincoln did during the Civil War. And when a president suspends habeas corpus means you have the right to face your accuser, you have a right to a trial, you have rights, basically. When you suspend habeas corpus, the president can simply arrest anybody he wants, say this person is an enemy of the state, put them in prison with no trial. Which is what Lincoln did during the Civil War, but we were in a civil war. But Article 1, Section 9 of our Constitution says, and I quote, this is from the Constitution of the United States, "The privilege of the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended unless when in cases of rebellion or invasion, the public safety may require it." And if Trump had declared a suspension of habeas corpus, that could have been it. A reporter for the Philadelphia Inquirer, Julia Taroso, said, tweeted, quoting a guy who was in the protests, in the riots, in the insurrection on January 6th. He said, "We wait for civil war. It will be next. You have to prepare for the worst, and the worst will come because the left is pushing it." Mo Brooks, Ginny Thomas, the wife of the Supreme Court Justice, Rudy Giuliani. In the opinion of many commentators, in particular, a really good commentary that David K. Johnston wrote for Raw Story, clearly violated the federal law against seditious conspiracy, he writes. This is the law. Quote, I'm going to cut out some of the redundant language here and shorten this just a little bit, but this is the law. Every single word is from the law about sedition. If two or more persons in any state or territory conspire to overthrow, put down, or to destroy by force the government of the United States, or by force to prevent, hinder, or delay the execution of any law of the United States, that would include, the election, right? Or by force to seize, take, or possess any property of the United States contrary to the authority thereof, like seizing the Capitol, they shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 20 years or both. That's seditious conspiracy. That is what these people did. What Mo Brooks did, what Donald Trump did, what Rudy Giuliani did, what Ginny Thomas did before this seditious mob, this traitorous mob marched on the White House. Mo Brooks, in his speech, said, "Today is the day American patriots start taking names and kicking ass." Jim Clyburn talked about how, they knew where his private office was, no name on the door. They went right there. They were looking for a member of Congress they could kill or capture so that Donald Trump could invoke a suspension of habeas corpus, and the storm would come. This phrase from that bizarre conspiracy movement. They've been expecting something's going to happen that's going to allow Donald Trump to seize complete control of America. That would have been it. And now we find that we've got cops and firefighters and state lawmakers and combat veterans who were among the people storming the Capitol. And that this bizarre conspiracy that is being fed by right-wing talk radio, Fox News, and the marginal right-wing networks, and over half the Republicans in the House of Representatives and a dozen Republican senators.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We have to have absolute accountability, and it can't just be the small fish who showed up in the Capitol. It's got to be the big fish who put them there.
Is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Our book for the Thom Hartmann Book Club today is A Nation Forged by Crisis, A New American History by Jay Sexton. And I'm reading from the introduction. This is page 9. The quest for national security and global power, America's shifting position in the international economy, and fluctuations in immigration have made the United States the nation that it is today. Americans' foreign relations have been conditioned its history not only in their cumulative effects over the long haul, but also as a result of their volatility. In periods of crisis, America's position in the world has lurched in unexpected directions. For as inexorable as the rise of the United States appears in retrospect, there have been contingent moments in which the very existence of our nation was up for grabs. This is the essence of crisis. The world turned upside down, the known replaced by the unknown, panic reigning as people struggle to maintain their balance and shifts in the very ground beneath their feet. It came with a speed and ferocity that left men dazed, New York Times correspondent Elliot Bell wrote of Wall Street's catastrophic collapse in October of 1929. Quote, "The market seemed like an insensate thing that was wreaking a wild and pitiless revenge upon those who thought to master it," end quote. Crises are contagious, spreading like viruses from one realm to another. It's not without reason that the word crisis was associated with medical conditions and health scares in the 19th century. Each of the periods under consideration in this book were less a singular crisis than a set of interlinked crises. A political crisis could trigger an economic panic, which in turn could intensify social conflict, and so on. As these pandemics spread through the body politic, crisis itself was normalized, becoming an almost accepted characteristic of an age. Just as foreign crises have spread to the United States, domestic ones have spilled across its borders, unsettling foreign countries and peoples, as well as reconfiguring America's connections to the world. Consider the fateful winter of secession that followed the 1860 election of Abraham Lincoln. The crisis over slavery that divided the Union into warring sections that led to a series of sharp reversals in America's position in the global system. The foreign capital that had rushed into the roaring American economy in the preceding decades suddenly began to flee. Indeed, more capital left the United States in 1860 to 1862 than came into it. Also a once-in-a-century occurrence. One of the world's most valuable commodities and America's largest exports, Southern cotton, was confined to the ports of the Confederacy as a result of Richmond's ill-fated diplomatic strategy, leading to unemployment and social unrest in the British textile town of Lancashire. The most unexpected reversal was how the national security that the United States had attained after the war against Mexico in the 1840s was suddenly imperiled, with European powers encroaching once again upon the Western Hemisphere. Meanwhile, the Confederate emissaries across the Atlantic were in search of alliance with Britain. Our country, Secretary of State William Seward lamented in early 1861, after having expelled all European powers from the continent, now threatened to relapse into an aggravated form of its colonial experience, and like India, Turkey, China, and Italy, become the theater of transatlantic intervention and rapacity. A wider view of American history that looks beyond the nation's borders brings into focus not only the migration patterns, economic flows, and international rivalries that have connected the United States to the world, but also those rare moments in which the very existence of the nation was in question. Perhaps none was more pregnant with implications than the autumn of 1877, when the fate of the Patriots' bid for independence hung in the balance. Having proclaimed their independence to the world the previous 4th of July, their cause had stalled on the battlefield and in the diplomatic courts of the old world. "I think the game is pretty near up," Washington privately confessed at year's end. "To accomplish their independence is not quite so easy as to declare it," the British philosopher Jeremy Bentham haughtily remarked. But then a series of events forever changed the course of modern history. The stunning Patriot victory at the Battle of Saratoga in October, the drafting of the Articles of Confederation in November that, for all its limitations, further demonstrated the political resolve of the Americans. And most of all, the alliance signed with France in February 1778, which provided the Patriots with the resources, military assistance, and naval power that ultimately tipped the scales in their favor. There are comparable Saratoga moments in other crises in U.S. history, as we shall see. These contingent moments played out in their own distinctive ways, but are joined by a common denominator that has been curiously forgotten in our age of U.S. global power. Foreign states and people have played decisive roles in the critical moments of American history. As we make our way through our own era of global instability, in an unprecedentedly interconnected world, there's perhaps no more important lesson from the past to keep in mind. "Crisis may beget crisis," Franklin Roosevelt said, as his administration transitioned from battling the Great Depression to entering the Second World War. "But the progress underneath does not wholly halt. It does go forward," end quote. Like so many of Roosevelt's public statements, this one reveals a truth even as it conceals others. The United States came out on the other side of its greatest crises as a stronger and more efficiently organized nation, as Roosevelt suggested. The process of mobilizing resources to counter threats catalyzed innovations in political economy, such as the creation of a national financial system during the Civil War, and the economic reforms of the New Deal. The book is A Nation Forged by Crisis by Jay Sexton.
On the Science Revolution this week, we have Dr. Justin Frank, MD. He's here on the psychology of authoritarianism. We'll be taking a deep dive into the mind of authoritarianism, where and how the authoritarian mind begins. And Dr. Frank ties the mind of the authoritarian followers to Donald Trump and the whole mess there. Plus, the vaccine effort has failed. Can it be fixed? Or should we just do the one-shot approach? Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are found. Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. Let's discuss this. All right. I've got a whole nother collection of details and things that I'm going to lay out in the third hour of the program. But, I think we've got enough on the table right now. Just to recap very, very quickly, I am of the opinion that the 70 plus million people who voted for Donald Trump, the tens of thousands of people who have showed up in protests and rallies in favor of Trump and against the inauguration of Joe Biden in state capitals and in Washington, D.C., that this movement would not even exist in its current form if it wasn't for right-wing media and Republican politicians who thought that they could just ride this train for a while. You know, hey, we'll get the base vote. These people love Trump. We'll get them on our side. That'll get me reelected. I'll have more power and I'll make more money and I'll get a bigger, multi-million-dollar paycheck as a lobbyist when I retire from Congress. And they'll give millions to my campaigns and I can use that money in all kinds of ways. And I can travel around the world for free on it. This is how these Republican senators and members of the House were thinking. Well, Trump's a little nutty, but we can just go along with him and everything will be fine. And now everything's not fine. And the movement has not just established itself, it has deep roots. The FBI just issued a notice. ABC News reporter Aaron Katursky pushed this out. He said, this is from the FBI, quote, armed protests are being planned in all 50 state capitals from 16 January through at least 20 January, and at the U.S. Capitol from 17 January through 20 January. They have warned that if Congress attempts to remove POTUS via the 25th Amendment, a huge uprising will occur. I'm reading from the FBI bulletin. The bulletin goes on to say that one particular group of Trump supporters, quote, quoting from the FBI, quote, is calling for storming, and the FBI puts that words in quotes, storming state, local, and federal government courthouses and administrative buildings in the event President Trump is removed prior to Inauguration Day. Amazing. Jared, Jared, before you talk, just imagine if this was on the other side. If you had become convinced that Republicans had stolen an election and were planning on literally transforming America into a fascist state, would you not protest? I mean, let's consider who the real villains are here. Jared, what's up?
I would do everything in my power to stop it. Because that makes sense. I mean, you just keep repeating these big lies over and over and over again. And,
it's the Pied Pipers, not the children.
Nobody's calling this stuff out, and I'm sick of it. I'm done with this stuff. Like, let me tell you, I had a guy come into my job like a day ago, and he was spouting stuff about the Illuminati and the Rothschilds, and he said that there's going to be a 10-day blackout now, and that Trump enacted the Insurrection Act. And I was like, sir, where are you getting this information from, one? And two, what if you're completely wrong about everything you just said? And he didn't have an answer for anything I said. It's like this conspiracy theory stuff has got to stop at this point.
Yeah.
Like, it really is the threat to civilization. Cumulus and iHeartRadio are the two big radio networks in the country. Control probably 80 or 90% of the 1,000 plus right-wing radio stations.
And Cumulus, a couple of days ago, issued a memo to all of their employees. Now, this would be probably not the nationally syndicated shows, but all their local talk show hosts, because there's literally hundreds of local right-wing talk show hosts across America. There's a few dozen progressive talk show hosts across America, and some really good ones too. But nonetheless, issued this memo saying that now is, I'm paraphrasing, now is the time to inform people that the election was fair and honest and the count was accurate and that we need to get on with life. Now, it's a little kind of, barn door meet horse stuff, but at least one media agency has realized that they may have some role, and some liability, frankly, in this whole thing. But I'm telling you, this is the same thing that happened in Germany in the early 30s when the conservatives in the parliament thought they could go along with Hitler and just use him and his popularity to keep their own power. And look how it turned out. Anyhow,
yeah.
Jared, thank you. Thank you for the call. It's good to hear from you, as always. Jessica in Chicago. Hey, Jessica, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Well, let's get the paddy wagon buses ready at the capitals for Trump's terrorists. And let's just get the zip ties ready for them. But a reason I called, I'm 100% in agreement with everything you've said today, but the leader of the Proud Boys was arrested when he landed in Washington with high magazines and other weapons. He's in prison right now, but I believe he needs protective custody because I believe when he met with Trump in the secret location at the White House, I think Trump tells him how to pull up the Capitol maps. They all pull up the maps on the AOC.gov, and it shows the Capitol's tunnel systems even. And he has directions. He puts directions online. So Trump is like mafia. Joyce just said that, and I love it. He's like mafia, and he's going to get him killed off. Like Epstein was in prison, and he's killed off. So I believe the Democrats have to protect him. And also, Trump played the music Funeral for a Friend when his terrorists took off with nooses and handcuffs and guns. And his terrorists are live streaming it to his family in the tent while they play Funeral for a Friend for Pence. So no wonder Pence doesn't want to do the 25th Amendment. And also,
yeah,
Tom,
I think Pence is terrified, frankly.
Yes. And Tom, you wanted an update on Larry Brock. He stole Pelosi's podium. He's clean shaven with his hair dyed blonde, but guess what? His ex-wife turned him into the FBI.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, it's getting out there. There you go.
For the Southern statues for prison, destroying federal property, 10 years, looting federal property, 10 years. Trump put that law into action because he was so worried about the Southern state statues.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Jessica, thank you. But again, let's keep in mind, this would not be happening if there wasn't somebody out there, if there wasn't a group of people out there who, in exchange for advertising dollars in the media and political power and cash, these Republican politicians, had they not been promoting this conspiracy theory for months now. Morris in Long Beach. Hey, Morris, what's up?
All right, my brother, you done made all the observations. Okay, now, what would you suggest? Now, give me some time, Professor. What would you suggest we do from here?
Number one, there needs to be enormous both political and social pressure put on the Republican members of Congress who have been backing this theory that the election was stolen to come out and explicitly say to their followers the election was free, fair, and appropriately decided. People have to regain confidence in our electoral system or all bets are off. The media needs to be doing the same thing. You know, the Washington Post and the New York Times have done a fairly good job of it, but, you know, most Republicans don't even read those publications. The Wall Street Journal needs to do this. Fox News needs to do this. The right-wing media needs to do this, and right-wing talk show hosts have to acknowledge that this election, you know, actually did go to Joe Biden, that he's appropriately and legally the next president of the United States. That's the foundation of the entire thing. The big lie here. Hitler had his big lie about the stab in the back and how, it was the Jews and the communists who caused Germany to lose World War I, and they surrendered early when they shouldn't have. And it was a complete lie. He completely reinvented the history of World War I. But that big lie got him the chancellorship of Germany and got him into position. Trump's big lie, which he started, by the way, in the weeks before the 2016 election, is that the elections in the United States are rigged. He's claimed for 5 years now that 3 million people voted for Hillary Clinton who weren't legal voters. To you, Morris.
Okay, my brother, remember the Civil War? That was an insurrection. Nobody went to jail, right? Now, here's what I would think we might want to do. We're going to have a trade-off. We're going to calm things down. We're going to trade off. Number one, the government's going to buy the fossil fuel industry. We're going to get off of fossil fuels and get rid of the Koch brothers' influence. Oh, Lord. My brother, let me get that situation, Tom. I can't talk over music.
Okay. Morris, hang on. You could talk over the music, but Morris just hung up. I'm sorry, Morris. But we had 2 minutes, which is a pretty good time. We'll try again. It is 45 minutes past the hour. We're discussing, how did we get here and where do we go from here? We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Let's see here. Paul in Benton, Pennsylvania. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing, Tom? I had heard something this morning that, that QAnon subscriber that got elected to Congress, I think she's from Florida or Georgia, supposedly she tweeted Nancy Pelosi's location in the Capitol.
Twice.
The
Eric Swalwell is tweeting that she committed a crime. Yes. Let me catch her name here, if I still have it. No, I don't have it. I've got it somewhere in my pile. Anyhow, continue.
Yeah. And,
here it is. It's Lauren Boebert, Boebert of Colorado, Republican of Colorado, freshly.
Okay, there was another one. There was another one too. I think her name is Green. The one I'm thinking of was
Taylor
from Florida.
Green from Georgia.
Yeah. I know there was a couple QAnon subscribers that got elected to Congress, but in regards to accountability. You probably remember this a few years ago. There was a guy from up your neck of the woods named George Weggers. He was the president of the Banditos Motorcycle Club. And they got him on a wiretap on a phone call saying, I'm paraphrasing here, I told my guys to keep quiet. Don't talk to anybody. If anybody asks you anything, you say nothing. That was enough to get him a RICO indictment, and they busted, I think, something like 60-some banditos across the country, the ATF, the FBI, the DEA. And it's like, why can't they use a RICO statute on these, I don't know what you call them, conspirators, whatever. Yeah. I mean, if they can do that to
I think they may well, Paul. I mean, they may well. I mean, there are a lot of tools that law enforcement has, but my point is that, we can arrest all the people we want, we can put people in jail, we can, and all that's going to do is validate their belief that this is a deep state, left-wing takeover of the United States by force. And it's going to make them even more committed to using guns and violence, and, to try to take back the country. And until they realize, deep down inside, the absolute certainty, until the average Republican acknowledges and realizes deep down inside with absolute certainty that Joe Biden actually won that election, nothing's going to change.
Yeah,
and that means that, and to get there, you've got to have people like Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley and Lindsey Graham and the others come out and publicly say, I was wrong. I was exploiting your concerns. There's got to be a public reckoning, essentially, or admission of guilt, as it were. They've got to lay out exactly how this thing happened. These people are not going to be listening to me. They're not going to be listening to you, Paul, or even to the New York Times or the Washington Post. They're listening to Fox News and to Republican politicians. And Fox News and Republican politicians they have a choice right now. Are they going to support the United States of America and our electoral system, or are they going to continue to try and tear it down? That's what it comes down to. Paul, thanks. Thanks for the call. Well, points well made. Well said. We'll be right back. It's 49 minutes past the hour. Stick around. The Hartmann Report is a free daily podcast, 7 days a week, and you can find our entire 3-hour podcast over at thomhartmann.com.
Our video for the day are for Thom Hartmann Program supporters. It's available over at thomhartmann.com. Is talking about how the Donald Trump presidency has been fundamentally destructive, not just to the United States, not just to our political norms, not just to our body politic, not just to the institutions of the presidency and our governance in general. His disrespect of judges, his disrespect of Congress, his pushing the boundaries of what the Article 2, an Article 2 office can do. But it's also destructive around the world because of the things that he's not doing, that aren't getting attended to. We've got major parts of the world that are spiraling into chaos that several of them could trigger World War III. And instead, he's sitting there live tweeting Fox News, literally every morning and every evening. Check it out. It's available over at thomhartmann.com.
Welcome back. Renee in Paris, France. Hey, Renee, thanks for watching us on Facebook Live. What's up?
Hi, Tom. I have a question. I found it rather disturbing that there were so many ex-military involved in the riots at the Capitol last week. One picture comes to mind was the guy with the zip ties who turned out to be a retired lieutenant colonel. I'm curious as to, do these guys lose their pension? I mean, if they were in the military, received a nice pension after 20 years, and then they turn around and attack our country, is there something that can be done about that, or is this something that they just get their pension regardless? I mean, it seems like we were whipsawed in this whole thing.
Right. I don't know, Renee. I'm not that familiar with the law as regard to military pensions. I mean, it may be that once they are convicted of a felony, they lose their pension. But on the other hand, maybe it has to be service related. I just don't know the answer to that question.
Okay, I was just curious about that. I'm going to keep an eye on this issue and see if anything comes out. But thank you for everything that you do.
Renee, do you speak French, and are you watching the French news?
Yes.
What is the French media saying about what's going on in the United States right now?
Well, it's shocking. Of course, I wouldn't say that France has been pro-Trump. I mean, probably the opposite. But it's just really shocking that this has happened. And I have a lot of people that I know in Paris here who ask me, how did it ever go this far? And it's hard to explain because they simply don't understand that this has been a buildup for, the past 4 years. I mean, it's scary. And I would say mostly the people I've talked to just really don't understand how it went this far.
Yeah. Trump's first big lie was that Obama wasn't even born in the United States and shouldn't be an American president. And then he amplified or built on that big lie in 2016 by saying even though he won the White House, the election was rigged and there were 3 million people who voted who were, undocumented citizens, aliens who voted for Hillary Clinton. He continued to amplify that lie over and over and over again for 4 years, establishing the foundation for his followers and Republicans to believe that the electoral system in the United States doesn't work properly. And so he just primed the pump. He laid as you said, he laid the foundation for this. He plowed the earth, and then, he planted these seeds. And now, here comes the harvest. And it just reminds me of the old saying from Hosea. I think it's the 6th chapter of Hosea. He who sows the wind shall reap the whirlwind. And I think the Republican Party is getting that right now. Renee, thank you. Thank you for the report from France.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. You too. Ruben in Sherman Oaks, California. Hey, Ruben, what's on your mind?
Hi. You read the bulletin regarding the FBI that's threatening the Democrats not to do anything against Trump. Otherwise, there will be attack on the state capitals. The question is, if the Homeland Security and FBI, with all the money that they get of their budget, they cannot protect these establishments, we should rethink the money they get.
I don't think the answer is messing with the budget of the federal police agencies. I think the answer is doing a deep dive in the personnel of the police agencies, looking for those who have become followers of these bizarre conspiracy theories that lead people to sedition and treason.
But the point I'm trying to make, the point I'm trying to make is they're training Democrats not to do anything. So they want us to say kumbaya and let things just move on. These
are all threats.
Go out there, and all these terrorist groups that they call themselves militia are at the feet of FBI that they haven't dealt with it all these years, and they let them fester and get bigger and bigger and stronger.
Yeah, I'm with you, Ruben. And there was an interesting debate over the weekend on one of the weekend news shows where I think it was Frank Figliuzzi, the former FBI assistant director, as I recall, high up in the FBI anyway. And he said there is no domestic terrorism law in the United States. And most people say that we shouldn't have one because that would allow the president to designate his political enemies as domestic terrorists. And once you're designated a terrorist, you lose all your rights. It's basically a selective loss of habeas corpus. And I agree with him. I don't think we want to go down that road. But I guarantee you, if Trump figures out a way to remain president after January 20th, that we will. And had he, we would be going down that road. But then you look at what the FBI did with Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King back in the 60s. I mean, they wiretapping him, blackmailing him, threatening him. He had an affair. They played the recording for him and said, if you don't commit suicide, we're going to tell your wife. The FBI. I mean, we don't want that kind of thing going on. But on the other hand, we don't want to cripple our law enforcement agencies. It's a really delicate line. And we need good, rational people running these agencies and making solid and rational decisions. We'll be back with the Black Eagle, Joe Madison. He's going to drop by the program right after this break. Stick around. It's going to be fascinating.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Plexiderm, real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. Gabby takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at gabby.com/Tom. HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at hellofresh.com, code TOM. And Superbeats, heart chews for heart-healthy energy. More info at superbeatsradio.com/Tom.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Health Justice Now, Single Payer and What Comes Next by Timothy Faust. And this is from the introduction. A secret scream rings through America. It rings down the sterile fluorescent hallways of our hospitals. It rings over our rural towns and our native reservations. It rings through our prisons, the bellies of our great cities. It rings in our farms and our fields, our streets and our sewers, our bodies and our blood. And we are cursed to never hear it clearly until at last we realize it has been our own mouth screaming and we are lost. A child born today inherits in that secret a new American squalor, the skeletal remains of the American cities, the bleached bones of the American suburbs. This secret is a birthright of continual exploitation, pumped for labor and drained of cash and then punished for the resulting suffering. Punished for being hungry, punished for being sick, punished for being pregnant, punished for being poor, punished for being black or brown, punished for being queer, for being unlucky, for being. At the base of that suffering is lodged a little truth, like a knot in the stomach. In America, sickness makes you poor, and poorness makes you sick. This is a book about that relationship and why it happens, and why it's unnecessary, and what we can do to fix it. The cosmic whirling of God's great slot machine has not determined that some people are fated to suffer while others flourish. We have the resources to take care of everyone, and yet we refuse to do so. Your medical debt and medical bills are unnecessary, but we have chosen to make them necessary. These are structural problems with structural causes, and many of them share roots in how we pay for health care. This is a book about health care and health finance. They are different. Healthcare is anything that helps you stay safe and healthy. It's a kind of freedom from and within your own body. Health finance is the method by which we as a country pay for that freedom and by which we decide who gets to have it and who doesn't. Healthcare is more than what happens to you in the hospital. Healthcare is whether your home makes you sick, or your food makes you sick, or your environment makes you sick, or whether you have enough money to afford the things that keep you healthy. In America, the structure of corporate health care has convinced us that some people deserve health care and some people don't. This is a book about that corporate health finance, about private insurance and private insurers. For half a century, they've convinced us that they're the only things that keep us or could ever keep us from the utter financial ruination of illness. They've sold us different, inadequate insurance plans and persuaded us that this is a form of great liberty, while chipping away at our freedoms for profit and holding our bodies and our children's bodies hostage. This is a book about single-payer health care, a health finance model in which we pool our abundant collective resources to provide health care to all people. It is a common model across the world. As we will discuss in this book, we have the potential not just to enact a single-payer program in America, but to build the greatest healthcare program among any so-called developed democracy. Here is my profession of faith. I believe beyond any doubt that single payer is demonstrably sound and imminently feasible. I believe a properly ambitious and well-structured single-payer program will do more than any other American social program of this generation to soothe the burns, to resuscitate the spirit, to nourish the moral will of the American people. I believe it will loosen the loathsome manacles of American health finance, an exploitative institution that profits by plundering from us our own bodily autonomy, and that anchors a larger exploitation that holds those whom we love as captive leverage to guarantee our servitude to abusive employers or domestic partners, to those who seek to dominate us both in the office and in the hospital. I believe this nation owes its people, whose labor has created its rich banquet, the safety and agency of healthcare. I believe this healthcare is greater in scope than that which happens upon an operating table. I believe that housing, food, income, and more, the components of basic human dignity, are healthcare. And I believe our work is that of striving toward justice for all people. And I therefore believe, I have to believe, that single-payer healthcare is our moral imperative. Single-payer is our tool. Single-payer is our weapon. Single-payer is our first step. But single payer on its own is not the goal. This book is about health justice. Healthcare is personal, so I want to start this book personally by introducing two friends of mine, Steve Way and Kyle Kolick. They're two guys about my age, I'm 30, who live in North New Jersey. They're sweet, gentle people and probably the most charismatic pair of friends I've met my entire life. They make me laugh until my face hurts, and we like watching pro wrestling together. They're also being utterly broken by our American healthcare system, and it's keeping them from living their lives. Steve has muscular dystrophy. The muscle and tissues that hold his body together are eating themselves. He's doing pretty good, all things considered. He beat his original life expectancy of 18, and now probably has a long life ahead of him. Steve needs a wheelchair to move and a ventilator to help him breathe. The book, Health Justice Now, Timothy Faust. Constitutional law. Sure, we talked about the power of the president, about when he could make war, about what he could do on his own. Impeachment by Cass Sunstein.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So I have been laying out for the past hour my argument that while it's important and in fact vital to be focusing on the people who stormed the Capitol, these people who committed treason and attempted revolution, basically, not just sedition, but treason against the United States of America, that most of them would not be there, many of them would not be there were it not for them being whipped up over 4 years by big lies from Donald Trump and continuing lies from at least a dozen Republican members of the Senate and over 140 members, Republican members of the House of Representatives, and an entire right-wing media echo chamber and infrastructure that has convinced many of these people that the election was, in fact, stolen from them. And there's a variety of things that are animating them. Although the changing of America, the election of a black vice president for the first time, clearly is a big piece of that. I wanted to get one of the people whose insights and thoughts into these kinds of matters that have to do with the nature and fate and future of America I most respect on the program to discuss with me for this half hour, the first half hour of this program today. Joe Madison, the Black Eagle. His program is on Sirius XM on the Urban View channel 126 from 6 to 10 a.m. every morning. If you don't listen to Joe, he's really worth checking out. That's the 6 to 10 a.m. Eastern time. He's also a civil and human rights activist. JoeMadison.com is his website. His Twitter handle is MadisonSiriusXM. And Joe, welcome back to the program. It's great talking with you.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. And everything you said is absolutely right. I've been listening. You are right on target. There's nothing you have said, nothing that you have said that is a lie. Like many of the folks in our profession who have been spreading often the big and little lies.
It's really grim, Joe, and I can my listeners have been, in fact, I keep putting out the number for Congress, 202-224-3121. Call your elected representatives and express your opinion, whether it's for impeachment or whatever it may be. They're weighing in loudly. What are your listeners saying? What's the sense of Joe Madison what's going on?
Well, let me just start with today. We had Benny Thompson, Congressman Benny Thompson, who came on because as chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, he is now contemplating, the entire committee is, whether or not the people, 24 and more, who have been arrested for the siege of the Capitol, whether they should be on a no-fly list. To come to find out, they are. Many of them are. But then he said that individuals such as Senator Hawley of Missouri, Senator Cruz of Texas, and Congresswoman Boebert, if in fact they are found culpable or guilty of inciting this riot that took place, that in fact, can you imagine that these members of Congress could also be on the no-fly list? Now, that would be quite a bit of news. And that there are no, when it comes to the no-fly list, there are no exceptions to that policy. The other thing that he announced on the show this morning was that the Congressional Black Caucus is holding a hearing this week to look into the actions or inactions of the Capitol Hill Police and other law enforcement agencies, and how they handled these protesters, these rioters, compared to, and the preparation compared to the way they prepared, quote unquote, for the Black Lives Matter protest back in June. And they also think that there were some inside assistance on the part of these law enforcement officials up on Capitol Hill. And I have to bring up something, because this is our business, Tom, and it has been all the years we've known each other, is that I wish that the younger journalists that I listen to, you listen to, we watch on TV, I wish that they would do their homework and quit saying, oh, this never happened to us. This never happened before. I saw some of these cable news shows where the reporters were attacked, and they feared for their lives, and they said this is, we've never seen this happen. When in reality, people, please do your homework. This is exactly what happened, particularly during the Civil Rights Movement. My goodness, reporters were attacked in southern states when they tried to cover the various trials. For example, Little Rock, Arkansas, the Little Rock Nine. They're documentary films of reporters being attacked, photographers being attacked. He's no longer with us, Simeon Booker, who was the outstanding journalist for Ebony Magazine, Johnson publication. He told me once, and it's also written in his memoirs, that he had to carry a Bible instead of reporter's notebook, Tom, to pretend to be a minister, or the mob would in fact attack him. So that's what we've been talking about. But I've also, more to your point, Tom, I've also pointed out the fact that people in our industry, I am not letting right-wing talk show personalities, professionals, their management, the owners of their station off the hook. I am absolutely not going to do it. They perpetrated the lies. And we've been on panels with them. I mean, people need to understand. We've been on panels with these people where they have argued us. They accepted what Donald Trump has done. And now what we're seeing is not just what he's done as president, but now we're seeing the character of the man. we are clearly seeing the character of the man, and we talked about his character, and they accepted it. So I've said this, and it's become a quote on the show. They fed the beast, and this beast attacked them. And don't argue. I hear the music, but don't argue about demonstrators tearing down a CVS when these folks tore down the People's House.
Yeah, it's like Hosea said, sow the wind, reap the whirlwind. I mean, that's what's going on. We're talking with Joe Madison, the Black Eagle, the great talk show host on Sirius XM Channel 126 every morning, 6 to 10 a.m. Eastern Time. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And Joe's website is joemadison.com, spelled just like it sounds. You can tweet him at Madison Sirius XM. Stick around. And welcome back. Joe, we've lost our Sirius XM listeners, but we still are on the air with our nonprofit stations and on TV, on Free Speech TV. I'm curious, I recall Jim Clyburn talking about how they knew where he was and they were coming for him. And when I heard, and I don't recall if I heard that on your program or if I heard it someplace else, and the thought that came to my mind is that, you know, these people were planning a lynching. What do you know about this, and what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, it was. Jim Clyburn was on our show, and he repeated it, I think, on other shows later on that morning or that day. But he pointed this out, that if you go to, I think it's the Rayburn building he's in, or his name is on the plaque. But they weren't in the office building. They were not in the congressional office building. They were in the Capitol. He has, as a whip, a majority whip, he has a special office. I've been in that office. Let me tell you, it is around the corner, down the stairs, up the stairs, and around another corner. You cannot find that office if you're on your own. You have to be told where it is, and in many cases, to be honest, you have to be escorted to that office. And by the way, that goes for the same thing with Nancy Pelosi. I've been in her office. He is convinced that this was probably an insight that someone he believes with the Capitol Hill police probably instructed the folks how to get there, or maybe even directed the people there. Now, I don't want to suggest that all members of the Capitol Hill police were involved in this, but there's no question about it. You saw it, you've talked about it. They were taking selfies. They removed the barriers. I had a retired General Honore on the show because, again, you remember him in New Orleans from Katrina's disaster. And he said when he was a 3-star general, his job was to coordinate the law enforcement officials. And it's just not the Capitol Hill police. It's a group of law enforcement officers. And one of the things he said, Joe, I couldn't get my cigarette lighter past a metal detector. But you mentioned about a lynching. You heard people say they would kill Mike Pence, and you saw them actually had a makeshift scalpel. Was that right? With a noose. I mean, this is we saw it with our own. This is, and then you had the zip tie guy that they're now looking for with all of these zip ties. So what were they going to do?
Yeah. I think what happened in Michigan with Gretchen Whitmer, or what almost happened in Michigan with Gretchen Whitmer, and the siege of the Capitol building in Lansing was a dry run for this. And I fear that this is a dry run for January 20th. Yeah. We'll be right back. Joe Madison is with us. Stick around. JoeMadison.com, Madison SiriusXM on Twitter. We'll be right back. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. You know, there's been a debate going on for 40 years about whether Reagan's, what George Herbert Walker Bush during the primaries in 1980 called voodoo economics, trickle-down economics, Reaganomics, whether it works or not. Does it work to stimulate the economy and help the lot of the average working person to cut taxes on rich people, like Donald Trump did, in 2017. $1.5 trillion tax cut for the rich. Does that help the economy? Well, the London School of Economics, the most prestigious economics institution in the world, just did the most comprehensive study on this, including 20 OECD nations, 20 of the richest nations in the world, including the United States and the United Kingdom, which is where this insanity began back in the early 1980s with Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. And the results are shocking. We lay the whole thing out in a new video that's over at ThomHartmann.com for people who support our program. Joe Madison is with us. JoeMadison.com, his website, his Twitter handle, Madison SiriusXM, and you can find Joe Madison every day on SiriusXM, channel 126 from 6 to 10 a.m. Eastern Time, on SiriusXM. Joe, we were talking about the noose that was hung up outside the Capitol building on that scaffolding, about the fact that they tracked down Jim Clyburn's office, which is not even marked and really, really hard to find. That it looks like there was inside help, or at least people who knew what was going on. That there were components of this invasion that were organized, well planned, serious, and then probably around them was just a bunch of people who were true believers who've been believing Trump and believing Hawley and believing Cruz. And how do we separate these folks out? And what are your thoughts? And again, what are you hearing on your show about how we need to solve this problem? It seems to me that until the majority of Republicans acknowledge that the election was actually real and fair, nothing's going to deal with the immediate crisis here. What do you think?
Well, Tom, I think the one way you deal with, particularly the internal situation with law enforcement, is that you hold congressional hearings. As I pointed out, the Congressional Black Caucus is planning, I believe, Congressman Benny Thompson said sometime this week, they're going to hold hearings and bring in witnesses and people that can testify to what happened, who did what. And I think the Congress acts swiftly. And that is, if you find that there were people who were liable for inciting or culpable individuals that were not doing their duty as law enforcement officials, you don't hesitate. You get rid of them. You fire them. And to be quite candid, I think that the people have to pay the price. And I've also pointed this out. I don't know how your audience feels about this, but if there is someone you recognize and you're an employer, and you recognize someone who was part of that mob, I think you fire them immediately and don't let them hide behind the so-called First Amendment. I mean, you get rid of them immediately. I think that if the Air Force veteran, the woman who was killed initially, no, she should not get a military funeral. No, she should not be buried in a military cemetery. I think we just have to get serious about this. I think if you own a radio station, if you are a program director, you are a manager, and you got anybody on your airwaves that are anyhow trying to justify the inciting of insurrection, I think quite candidly, they shouldn't be on the air. It's not about that, about free speech, because I know damn well if I incited a riot or the beating of a police officer, quite honestly, I would be called into a program director's office or a manager's office and probably, at minimum, maybe suspended, but I'd be fired. If I were an advertiser, there's no way that I would continue to support any media outlet, because these outlets have profited from lies and disinformation. And Tom, you know, no one uses the English language better than you do. There's a difference between disinformation and misinformation. And as we approach Dr. King's official birthday celebration, I always draw attention to one of his most profound quotes. And that was, he said that the two most dangerous things on the planet, the two most dangerous things on the planet are sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity. Sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity. And that is exactly what we have been dealing with, and we've been on these airways telling people this for years. It's got to stop, and people have got to be real about it.
I'm with you. Joe Madison, and Joe, you and I have been on the air for decades, actually. You've been on for even longer than I have, and I've been on for 18 years here. The Joe Madison Show. Joe, if you've never listened to Joe Madison Show, check it out. JoeMadison.com, Madison SiriusXM on Twitter. Joe, thanks so much.
Always. That's the Louise
program. Call 202
Thank you, Joe, and to Sharon.
9925.
We'll be right back. It's 27 minutes past the hour. We've got a guest here that I think you're going to want to hear, and then we'll be picking up your phone calls.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Unsettling Truths, the ongoing dehumanizing legacy of the doctrine of discovery by Mark Charles and Soon Chan Ra. This is from chapter 1. You cannot discover lands that are already inhabited. I, Mark, said this almost under my breath as I walked past a line of men dressed as Spanish sailors from the 1490s. I was in front of Union Station in Washington, D.C., near the massive statue of Christopher Columbus overlooking the United States Capitol. Every Columbus Day, there's an official ceremony in this plaza honoring Columbus as the discoverer of America. I had stumbled upon this ceremony by accident the year prior. There were a few non-natives holding signs and protesting the ceremony, but nothing very disruptive. I went back the following year primarily out of curiosity. I wasn't intending to protest, nor did I want to make a scene. As I walked up behind the statue and approached the group of men dressed as Spanish sailors, the words just came out of my mouth. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. As I walked further down the line, I said it again, this time a little louder. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. As I continued walking, I came to the front of the line where a group of men dressed in suits were standing. I repeated myself, making sure they could hear me. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. Suck it up, was the reply I heard as I kept walking. By this time, I'd walked around the statue and reached the front where a small stage had been erected and chairs set up for people to watch the ceremony. It hadn't started yet, but more than half the audience was seated waiting for it to begin. So I stopped near the center, turned toward the crowd, and in a calm but loud voice, I said to the people, "You cannot discover lands already inhabited. That process is known as stealing, conquering, or colonizing. The fact that America calls what Columbus did discovery reveals the implicit racial bias of the country, that Native Americans are not fully human." Quickly, one of the white men dressed in a suit walked over and interrupted me. "You are not welcome here," he said as he grabbed my arm and began walking me away. I attempted to explain the inappropriateness of both celebrating this holiday as well as hosting this ceremony, but instead of engaging in conversation, he threatened me with arrest and escorted me from the area. As I walked away from the gathering, I was amused at his words and the irony of their context. A white man participating in a public ceremony honoring Christopher Columbus as the discoverer of America, telling a native man he was not welcome in that space. How did a flawed assumption about the place of the indigenous population in U.S. society become normative? How are assumptions so deeply ingrained in the American psyche and imagination that dysfunctional and oppressive actions emerge? How did a dysfunctional idea and worldview form that allows for the displacement of native bodies? One of the explanations for the formation of this dysfunctional worldview is the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery is a set of legal principles that govern the European colonizing powers, particularly during the administration of indigenous land, regarding the administration. It is the primary legal precedent that still controls native affairs and rights, and international law formulated in the 15th and 16th centuries. From a theological perspective, the legal and political role of the doctrine of discovery is rooted in a dysfunctional theological imagination that shaped the European colonial settler worldview. The doctrine emerged from a series of 15th century papal bulls, which are official decrees by the Pope that carry the full weight of his ecclesiastical office. On June 18, 1452, Pope Nicholas V issued the papal bull Dum Diversus, which initiated the first set of documents that would compose the doctrine of discovery. The official decree of the Pope granted permission to King Alfonso V of Portugal, quote, to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens, Muslims, and pagans whatsoever, and other enemies of Christ wheresoever placed, and the kingdoms, dukedoms, principalities, dominions, possessions, and all movable and immovable goods whatsoever, held and possessed by them, and to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, and to apply and appropriate to himself and his successors the kingdoms, dukedoms, counties, principalities, dominions, possessions, and goods, and to convert them to his or their use and profit. End of quote from Pope Nicholas's papal bull of 1452. Dum Diversus would identify the Saracens, a common term for Muslims at the time, and pagans, essentially identifying any non-Christians as others, as those who could be targeted for, quote, perpetual slavery. The papal bull intentionally used language that identified those outside the European Christian world and enforced the Western theological imagination of non-Europeans as other. The Portuguese took these ecclesiastical statements to heart and perpetrated the slave trade from the African continent to the European and the American continents. As a Christian ruler, the King of Portugal would have power endowed from the church to take possession of the other as slave labor from the continent of Africa. The pagan African body was just another commodity to be taken for the pleasure and profit of the European Christian body, the one made most fully in the image of God. In the January of 1454, Pope Nicholas authored another bull. The book is Unsettling Truths by Charles and Ra. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court tells the story of Nixon and Reagan's committing treason to steal the White House. You know, back in the 1950s, or maybe it was the early 60s, I'm pretty sure it was the late 50s, Congress passed a law saying that if churches want to maintain their nonprofit status, if they don't want to have to pay taxes on the millions and billions that they're raking in, I mean, Pat Robertson is now a billionaire
from donations and things, from tax exempt contributions. Right? If you want to keep that money tax free, if you don't want to have to pay taxes on it, if you don't want to have to pay local taxes, you don't want to have to pay sales taxes, you don't want to have to pay property taxes. If you want to be tax free, there's only one thing you have to do, churches, and that is don't engage yourself in politics, because politics is how tax policy is made, and it's just not right. If we're going to subsidize you, all of us taxpayers, you don't engage yourself in politics. Well, in 2017, Trump issued an executive order basically telling the IRS, don't enforce this rule. We've got a whole rant about it up at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program. Check it out. Welcome back. Many of the really extraordinary photos that you've seen about what happened with that Capitol Hill insurrection, siege, the mob, came from Ron Haviv. He's a contributor to the New Republic and a war photographer who embedded with the mob during the Capitol riot. He writes for the New Republic, newrepublic.com. His Twitter handle is Ron Haviv, H-A-V-I-V. Or at New Republic, but I would say at Ron Haviv. And Ron, welcome to the program, and thanks so much for being with us. It seems to me that there are at least three groups of people who were participating in this. There were what I refer to as kind of the suckers, the people who believed Donald Trump when he said that Barack Obama wasn't a legitimate American and therefore wasn't legitimately elected, who believed Donald Trump 4 years ago when he said 3 million illegal immigrants voted for Hillary Clinton and the elections are rigged, and who believed him this time and showed up in good faith thinking that the country was, something nasty was going on, number one. Number two, there were the people who are just, looking for a riot, looking, the Yahoo wannabe militia Confederate cosplayers, basically. And then number three, you had people who were serious, trained, armed professionals, essentially, who were on a mission to kill or capture people in the Capitol and giving Trump the power to invoke the end of habeas corpus and therefore the end of the American Republic, as Lincoln did during the Civil War. What are your thoughts on those divisions and what you saw?
Thank you. It's good to be on the show. I think it was definitely you could divide it up to some degree to those groups. I mean, definitely the pure believers in Trump who came first to the ellipse and then marched to the Capitol, and people that were not specifically there to engage in violence, but to show their numbers and hope that there would be some sort of response. Then you had Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, First America, and other people like that who were there to do the same thing, but to kind of take it one step further. In terms of your grouping of the third, in terms of sort of professionals and people that really knew what they were doing, probably I would say to some degree they were there, but certainly when you look at what happened, they certainly didn't execute anything very well. The most of it that was going on, the kind of the clashes, plus the entering of the building, whether through windows or through open doors, was a mix of all of the different people. And when you see, in actuality, the amount of violence that took place, while dramatic without question, certainly could have been a lot worse from both sides. The protesters themselves could have been a lot more violent, and certainly the response from the Capitol Police and others could have been also a lot more violent. So I think, we are pretty lucky that more people were not hurt and more people did not die during this conflict.
I saw a post, and I can't vouch for the accuracy of this, which is always dangerous, but Team Trump News is posting over on Parler, and this was posted 20 hours ago, presumably from Donald Trump. Dear Patriots, when Nancy Pelosi contacted the Joint Chiefs to request the nuclear codes be kept from me, it appears she committed a seditious act. Her attempts to interfere in my administration are a national security threat. We are looking at the various federal criminal statutes we'll use to charge her. Some of the penalties include up to 20 years in prison and in some cases the death penalty. We also have evidence that she has connections to the Chinese Communist Party, which will lead to additional charges. I mean, whether he wrote this specifically or not, It sure looks like the Trump administration is not backing down in this. When you were part of that mob, when you were swept into this whole thing, did you hear anything about what might happen on January 20th? It seems to me like Donald Trump announcing to his followers that he won't be there on the 20th was almost his way of saying, okay, do what you want here.
Well, yeah, I think the 20th and the days before are completely up in the air. I don't think we really have any idea exactly what's going on. There's certainly lots of conversations about, January 17th, 17 being the number of the letter Q. There's going to be things happening that day. There's been a call for a million militia march on the 20th to block Biden and his administration from entering the White House. I think it's completely, we're in unknown territory here. And then, of course, the response, there will be thousands of National Guard on the street, plus all the other groups trying to protect the inauguration. And I think based on what we saw, that even though when everybody seems to know what's going to happen, nobody really knows what is going to happen. So we're really in uncharted territory here.
Did you have any conversations with any of the people who were there during the siege of the Capitol?
I didn't because I was trying very hard not to sort of identify myself as a member of the media, given that they are obviously very anti-media. During the speech earlier that day, the president blamed the media numerous times for everything that was going on, and of course, numerous media were attacked and stopped from doing their work. But what I can say from the conversations that I overheard and the chanting that I heard, they were very deliberate. They were very much felt like this was their house. They thought that the police were traitors. They thought that they should be allowed to do what they want because they felt and believed that Black Lives Matter, when they protested, were allowed to do whatever they want, which of course isn't true. But it was really kind of very much, they completely believed in what they were doing. The only issue was the majority of people, when they entered, had no idea what to do when they were inside, which is why you sort of had people kind of doing the tour. You had people talking to the police and asking where the bathroom was. You had people going to the police and asking where Chuck Schumer or Nancy Pelosi's office were. It was like a very surreal scene. We had people dressed up as pandas, people dressed up as shamans, mixed in with, serious, very seriously angry people screaming at the police, looking for Mike Pence at one point. There was a kind of a mix of many different things, kind of depending on the hallway that you went down or the different part of the building that you were in, you'd be experiencing a completely different act of protest, sedition, depending on whatever winds up being defined as their actions.
I understand there were several hours where the congressman from Maryland, Steny Hoyer, was begging the Republican governor of Maryland to send, which is right next door. I mean, Washington, D.C., parts of Washington, D.C. used to be parts of Maryland. It literally, right across the river or right across the road, begging them to send the National Guard in, and the governor of Maryland saying, I can't do that without authorization from the Department of Defense, and they're not answering their phone and they're refusing to give me authorization. So there were several hours there where there was basically no federal response at all. And then when the FBI went in to take out the body of that woman who died, I think there was 18 FBI agents who took her out. They didn't go back into the building. They left it alone for another hour. How long were you in there, and what was your sense of what actually turned the tide? When did it lose steam?
It lost steam basically when I think the National Guard arrived and other reinforcements arrived, and the police felt that they had enough power to push out the protesters. I think before that, they made a concerted decision not to be arresting people because that would just basically anger people more and cause more problems. They couldn't defend any territory that they had. And so they basically were waiting for what should have been there from the beginning, just more forces and forces that were better equipped. I mean, the Capitol Police were using pepper spray, which hurt having been sprayed along with the other people, but certainly was not enough to defend the building or stop people from going, and flashbangs and so on. And again, going back to this idea that it could have been a lot more violent, to their credit, I mean, while of course one woman was shot, they had the opportunity, obviously, to open fire on these protesters who, for the most part, seemed unarmed in terms of ammunition and guns and so on. They had sticks and other things, and obviously other people were found later to have more weapons. But basically, this could have turned into a very serious mass casualty event. And I think that both sides, while this was incredibly crazy and violent, this could have been much worse. And so I think when they finally, towards around 4 o'clock, once they determined that there was going to be a curfew, and that was set up, and more people arrived, they were able to then physically push people by just having more people. And I think also the majority of protesters at that point were tired. It had been already a long day.
It was what, 4 hours on at that point. And
yeah, exactly.
Ron Haviv, you can read about it. The headline is "A War Photographer Embeds with the Capitol Hill Mob" over at newrepublic.com. And you can tweet Ron at Ron, Haviv. Ron, thanks so much for dropping by.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Great talking with you. Keep up the great work. There's some really, really extraordinary photos you can see over there at the New Republic. It's 45 minutes past the hour. Back with your calls right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Taking back the mainstream media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here. And welcome back. Let's see here. Rodney in Madison, Wisconsin. Hey, Rodney, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Hey, thanks, Tom. I'm a first-time caller, and I'm not sure exactly how much time I've got, but I got a litany of questions. Do you want one by one, as much time as we have, or?
Sure. Well, generally we ask people to just stay to one question because there's other people in line and they would like to ask a question too. So what's your question?
Because these are all kind of related, so I'm just going to string through them here. What's preventing Trump from invoking Article 1, Section 9 that you had touched on earlier, now or at the sign of the next uprising?
You're talking the suspension of habeas corpus?
Yep. And then, do you think that this is why, a month or so ago that, all of his hand-picked civilians were placed in Pentagon positions?
I do think so.
And do you think that the acting Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, I believe that's...
No, it's not Rod Rosenstein. His name is Rosen. I think it's Jay Rosen, but
Jay Rosen. I mean, is he the only roadblock to preventing Pelosi being arrested, like you alluded to, and then I guess also why?
That's hard to say. If Trump is saying, if this Parler post is accurate, and it may well not be, right? It could just be somebody pretending to be Trump. But because we don't know, he's been essentially muffled. Yep. But if this post is accurate, then he's still playing president, and he's saying that his political enemies are criminals. This is what dictators do. This is what tyrants do. They use the instruments of law enforcement, the instruments of government, to enforce politics, to take down people who are their political enemies. That's the key. That's the cardinal characteristic of an autocratic tyranny, basically, of a non-democratic government. And that is what Trump has been saying he got elected on that. Lock her up, right? He got elected on that, on the promise of that. So that's where that goes. Rodney, I look forward to your next call and our next conversation. Thanks a lot for the call. Robert in Brooklyn, New York. Oh, Robert, you're listening on Sirius XM. Let me put you on hold until they come back on the air in 2 minutes. Dak in Los Angeles, watch us on YouTube. Hey, Dak, what's up?
I wanted to offer a solution and possibly a partial explanation for why so many people have believed all of these lies and the false dichotomies that apparently support the lies. The solution, there's more than one, but at a minimum, we should be pushing for approval voting. Better than that, something that would be like a balanced ranked choice voting, something that allows us a negative vote option, because this has been building up for decades, really, and it's been avoidable the whole time, and it will get worse if we don't do something to prevent it getting worse. Does that make sense?
Yeah. What was that first thing you suggested? A choice ballot?
Well, the first one I mentioned is approval voting. Approval voting is where
approval voting. That's where you have a none of the above option.
No. It's just like what we have now, except taking away the limit of only allowing you to pick one. But we also should have a negative vote option where you can directly vote against a candidate, and that works better with something like a balanced ranked choice voting.
Yeah, ranked choice voting is my preference. Absolutely.
Yeah, balanced ranked choice voting, not just ranked choice voting, but balanced ranked choice voting, or a Bramyr, BRAMYIR.
Jack, you've given me some homework. Thank you very much. You can help America return to democracy by telling friends and family how to listen to this and other great progressive programs. Tag You're It. So what makes Trump supporters Trump supporters? Good question, right? Well, Psychology Today did a deep dive into a whole bunch of literature on this and a number of studies and concluded that there were 5 characteristics that crossed right across virtually all Trump supporters. I do a deep dive on these on our video over at thomhartmann.com for the supporters of our program today. But here's essentially what it says. Number 1, they are authoritarians, by and large authoritarian followers. They want a strong father figure to make them feel safe. Number 2, social dominance orientation. They believe in a caste system and they think they should be in the top caste. Number 3, prejudice. They view people of other races poorly. Number 4, intergroup contact. Most of them have never experienced significant contact with people of another race or people, deeply different than them. And number 5, relative deprivation. They feel like they've been screwed. They're not sure why. And Trump tells them, oh, it's those brown people. It's all over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Robert in Brooklyn, New York, listening on Sirius XM. Hey, Robert, what's up?
Yeah, Tom, I was just wondering how come no one is mentioning the impact of the recent events on the children of the United States, because I've actually seen the impact on them, and I work in education, and I had to literally spend so many moments explaining to them what's actually happening and so forth. And we have a group of young children coming up right now that are just basically perplexed by everything that's going on around them, trying to understand the behavior of the adults, trying to just, make sense of the contradiction that they see at this level at such a high position and the behavior of the adults and so forth. And it's quite frightening to our young people across the country from what I am witnessing from place to place and so forth, the way the adults are acting, the confusion that's being created is not just hitting these other people that are so taken over by and lost their abilities to think for themselves, but overall, the children that are within this and are looking at what's happening. And
give me an example,
children. Well, for example, explaining how adults would actually destroy the Capitol. One child was asking me, why would they want to destroy our Capitol? Isn't that our own Capitol? Why would they want to do that? And one said to me today, you mean that's how people behave when they've been lied to for so long? That's what my dad said.
Are you a teacher? These are students?
Yeah, these are just basically students, and when they write about the experiences that they see and so forth, I just said to them, well, look, you better write about this, because in the future I believe someone may try to say that what you saw was not really what you saw. But plain and simply, I can definitely tell you that if any adults are listening, whichever side that you're on, the old saying is, if you're adults and you're having differences, you don't have them in front of the children. But right now, I am telling you, the young people are watching. It depends on the age group. Some age group really find that the adults are acting more like kids than the kids themselves, and are just looking on and just like, what's going on here? What sense does this make? They cannot make sense out of what they're seeing.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, the ground keeps shifting. Over the weekend, the Pentagon issued a press release about the events, and they referred to the riots, to the siege of the Capitol building, as First Amendment protests. That's now the official Trump administration phrase being used to describe this. First Amendment protests. It's insane. Robert, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. That's, it should give us all deep thought. I appreciate it. Thank you, Robert. Mark in Philadelphia. Hey, Mark, what's up?
Hey, how you doing, Tom? I don't think the First Amendment gives you the right to incite a riot and tell people to go storm the Capitol, huh?
No, it explicitly does not.
My point is, can he be charged by individual states? You had individual state representatives in that Capitol, senators and congressmen from Pennsylvania, Georgia, all the states. And he has a habit of, pardoning himself for federal crimes. Why doesn't individual states charge him with endangering the lives of individual senators, individual congressmen, trespassing on the Capitol, breaking and entering on the Capitol, terroristic threats, and you intend to murder Mike Pence? I mean, each state should charge this guy, Giuliani, Don Jr. I mean, everything's on videotape. In a court of law, you got a guy using the word, let's go to combat, let's storm the Capitol. He wouldn't, in a court of law, it wouldn't stand up. And if every state in this country filed charges against him for endangering their elected representatives, he'd go to prison. He'd have to defend 50 lawsuits. The Republican senators should be charged for interfering in other states' elections. They have no constitutional right to determine an election. The electors did that. They're all backing him. They bail him out of extorting the Ukraine. They bail him out of asking Russia to... Hillary Clinton warned us about this. 5 years ago, Hillary Clinton told America this was going to happen. He was going to use fake religion and fake patriotism and fake everything. He was going to spin everything. He was going to be the Wizard of Oz. He was going to use right-wing radical news outlets, exactly what you were talking about. Rush Limbaugh, Fox News, Newsmax, they're all actors. There's no reporters at those places. They're paid actors. They're getting rich off of Donald Trump. And so are the churches. Yeah.
I'm with you, Mark. We just have 30 seconds to, I think, to the end of this hour. So I'll jump in here and answer your question. If Trump issues a federal pardon to these, what the Pentagon is referring to as First Amendment protesters, then the only option would be for the states to do what you're describing. And yes, that could be done. There's a patchwork quilt of rules and constitutional provisions and norms from state to state. New York, for example, just had to pass a new, I don't recall if it was a law or an amendment to their constitution, that eliminated a double jeopardy provision that would have prevented the New York State from prosecuting somebody who had gotten a pardon for a federal crime. Other states may have to change their laws. Other states probably could very easily do it. So it's going to be up to the individual state attorneys general how they deal with this. But we have to have enforcement of the law. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Plexiderm, real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. Gabby takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at gabby.com/Tom. HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at hellofresh.com, code TOM. And Superbeats, heart chews for heart-healthy energy. More info at superbeatsradio.com/Tom.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Meat Racket, The Secret Takeover of America's Food Business by Christopher Leonard. This is from the prologue. It's titled The Hidden King. Nobody ever visits the stranded little community of Waldron, Arkansas. But even if they did, a tourist would never see the place for what it really is. Most outsiders would be fooled into thinking it was an actual small town. On any given morning, the residents awaken and begin their routine along Main Street. Old men park their pickup trucks by the curb in front of the Rock Cafe, which opens early for breakfast. As the cafe's booths and tables fill up, a congregation of old-timers in cowboy hats gathers in a loose ring of aluminum chairs out front, smoking and talking and stubbing out their cigarette butts in a bucket full of sand. Later in the morning, Chambers Bank in the south end of town opens up, and the tellers cheerfully greet customers by name. On Thursday at noon, the livestock auction opens in a cavernous barn on the north side of town, drawing crowds of ranchers who haul steel trailers behind their trucks, with cows staring out between the horizontal slats. In the late afternoon, teenagers park their cars by the gazebo south of the auction barn, proudly displaying their Mustangs and Broncos like big game trophies. These events have a rhythm of their own, the clockwork functioning of a small town economy. But it's all just window dressing. All of it would cease to exist in a moment and have no impact whatsoever on the true Waldron or its true economic reason for being. The real tempo of the town's economic pulse is measured by the coming and going of semi-trucks that roll down Main Street at periodic intervals, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In the middle of the night, tanker trucks full of animal feed rumble past the empty stores and out onto country roads that lead into the hilly terrain that surrounds town. At dawn, other trucks trundle in from the hills, heaped high with battered metal crates full of chickens that exude clouds of white feathers along the highway. The tempo can be measured in the regular arrival of train cars full of grain and oil seeds that dump their loads at a feed mill that clanks and hums and churns all night. And in the parade of refrigerated trucks that pull up to a slaughterhouse near the feed mill and get loaded with pallets of frozen meat. This is the real functioning of Waldron, Arkansas, and its true reason for being. This is the heartbeat of Tyson Foods, the nation's biggest meat company. The Tyson plant on the north end of Waldron is the only thing that keeps the town on the map. Appropriately, many residents simply refer to it as the complex. That's because the Tyson plant isn't just a factory, it's more like an entire small town economy consolidated into one property. The complex contains its own feed mill and hatchery, its own trucking line and slaughterhouse that covers several acres of land and processes about 1 million dead chickens a week. The complex is like an economic dark star that has drawn into itself all the independent businesses, an economic dark star that has drawn into itself all the independent businesses that used to define a small town like Waldron, the kinds of businesses that were once the economic pillars of rural America. Of course, tourists to Waldron would never see the Tyson plant, and not just because it sits on the north fringe of town away from Main Street. Visitors are stopped at its front gate and forbidden from exploring its grounds. So a tourist would have to be content to stroll along the sidewalks downtown, observing the fake Main Street, the deceptive array of little businesses that make it seem like a community. This illusory appearance cloaks Tyson's existence all the way from its roots in rural America to the grocery store shelves and restaurant menus where its products finally reach American consumers. The average shopper is usually fooled when he or she peruses the meat aisle, seeing what appears to be an abundance of choices and products. Tyson brand name wouldn't necessarily stand out with its logo gracing just a handful of products. But the rotisserie chicken slowly turning in its oven, the Bonisi brand pepperoni, the Lady Astor brand chicken cordon bleu, the frozen chicken pot pie, and the Wright brand bacon all come from the same company, Tyson. And then there is all the unlabeled meat that Tyson floods into the U.S. food system every day. The meat served in cafeterias, nursing homes, fast food restaurants, and suburban eateries where more and more Americans eat their meals. There's a very good chance any of the meat purchased in these places was made by Tyson. Even if Tyson did not produce a given piece of meat, the consumer is really only picking between different versions of the same commodified beef, chicken, and pork that is produced throughout a system that Tyson pioneered. Tyson's few competitors have resorted to imitating the company's business model just to survive. This book aims to explore the vast hidden territory between the remote farms and towns like Waldron, where Tyson raises millions of animals, and the final point of contact where consumers buy the company's meat. Unseen between these two poles is a hidden power structure that has quietly reshaped U.S. rural economies while gaining unprecedented control over the nation's meat supply. Just a handful of companies produce nearly all the meat consumed in the United States, and Tyson is the king among them. The company sits atop a powerful oligarchy of corporations that determines how animals are raised, how much farmers get paid, and how meat is processed, all while reaping massive profits and remaining almost entirely opaque to the consumer. Because Tyson and its imitators are based in the geographic and economic fringes of America in forgotten places like Waldron, the company has managed to escape the scrutiny it deserves. While Tyson's operations are remote, the company's business practices affect virtually everyone. About 95% of Americans eat chicken, which means they almost certainly eat chicken produced by Tyson. And then it goes on from there. The book is The Meat Racket, The Secret Takeover of America's Food Industry by Christopher Leonard. The mainstream media and deliver their message directly to voters. The book, Talk Radio's America.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. The Attorney General of the District of Columbia. D.C. is not yet a state, although the statehood for the District of Columbia needs to be at the top of the Democrats' agenda for Congress this year. But they still, nonetheless, have an Attorney General. His name is Carl A. Racine. And he was on MSNBC earlier today on Andrea Mitchell's program, and he said that he fully intends to prosecute anyone who incited a riot last Wednesday. So you've got Congressman Mo Brooks, who got up and gave a speech and said, American patriots must start taking down names and kicking ass. You got Rudy Giuliani, who said, if we're right, about, these Democrats stole the election, right? The big lie. This is the big lie. He said, if we're right, a lot of them will go to jail, so let's have trial by combat. Don Jr. said, called for total war. He said, we have a country to save, and this doesn't help anyone. It should be a message to all the Republicans. And this doesn't help anyone as, they're going to announce that Joe Biden is the winner of the presidency, right? It should be a message to all, this is Don Jr., it should be a message to all the Republicans who have not been willing to actually fight, the people who did nothing to stop the steal. This gathering should send a message to them. This isn't their Republican Party anymore. This is Donald Trump's Republican Party. That was Don Jr. And then Donald Trump himself, he said, we will stop the steal. We're going to walk down Pennsylvania Avenue. We're going to the Capitol. We're going to try and give our Republicans, the weak ones, the kind of pride and boldness that they need to take back our country. Nuremberg rally, anybody? Meanwhile, I mentioned last week, Thursday or Friday, the news came out that there was one, when the Capitol was stormed, was sieged, there were 300 to 400 members of Congress and their staff who were pushed into one giant conference room where they were almost shoulder to shoulder. They were so close to each other that they couldn't social distance. And about half the Republicans in the room, according to some reports, refused to wear their face masks. And when some of the elderly Democrats were literally begging them, some of them crying, begging them to put on their face masks because they don't want to get COVID and die, these Republican members of Congress laughed at them. This has been reported from multiple sources. And now, sure enough, one of the people who was apparently in that room, 75-year-old Bonnie Watson Coleman, Democratic Congresswoman, Democratic representative from New Jersey, has tested positive for coronavirus as a result of being jammed into that room. She just tweeted, while I'm experiencing mild cold-like symptoms, I remain in good spirits and will continue to work on behalf of my constituents. She's 75 years old. People in their 70s who get COVID have, not that 1 or 2 or 3% risk of dying, but more like a 10 or 20 or 30 or 40% risk of dying, depending on how old they are and what kind of health they're in. Say a prayer for Bonnie Watson Coleman. And Cori Bush, one of the newest progressive members of Congress, is introducing today, or may have already introduced. I haven't been able to scan the Capitol news at the depth that I would like because I've been on the air. But she announced yesterday that today that she was going to, she said, quote, this was a tweet yesterday afternoon, tomorrow I'm introducing my resolution to expel the members of Congress who tried to overturn the election and incite a white supremacist coup attempt that has left people dead. They have violated the 14th Amendment. We can't have unity without accountability. The phone number for Congress, if you would like to share your thoughts on whether the members of Congress who incited this and went along with this scam that the election was stolen should be expelled. The number for Congress, the Congressional Switchboard, it just gets you to one of the congressional operators, and then they will transfer you to whatever member of Congress you want. If you don't know who represents you in the House of Representatives, give them your zip code, they'll tell you. If you do know, you can simply ask for that person. You have 2 senators and 1 member of the House. You should call all 3 of them at the very least. And generally, people in leadership positions in the House and Senate are thought to represent more than just their own district, and you can contact them too. 202-224-3121, 202-224-3121. The 14th Amendment says very clearly that this cannot stand. In Section 2, where they're talking about, representation, they say they're talking about the right to vote. But when the right to vote in any election for the choice of electors for president and vice president, representatives of Congress, blah, 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 is denied any of the male inhabitants of such state being 21 years of age and citizens of the United States in any way abridged, except, in other words, you can't stop people from voting, right? That's the first part of it. Except for participation in rebellion or other crime. How is what Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley did not a rebellion? How is what these people were promoting not a rebellion? I think these members of Congress should be expelled. Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley will forever be remembered as this generation's version of John C. Calhoun, the Confederate traitor, the vice president to, as I recall, to Andrew Jackson, excuse me. But Bonnie Watson Coleman, this is tough stuff. And then again, it is being reported, although nobody can confirm it, because I think Parler might have been taken down by now. They were supposed to go down a couple hours ago. But B, this is coming from the Parler account of Team Trump News, that Trump is saying that when Nancy Pelosi reached out to the Joint Chiefs and asked for advice on how to deal with Trump if he tries to start a nuclear war, he said, when Nancy Pelosi contacted the Joint Chiefs to request the nuclear codes be kept from me, it appears she committed a seditious act. Her attempts to interfere in my administration are a national security threat. Now, if this is true, if this is what he actually said, he's turning up the volume, he's turning up the heat, and I fully expect that to be the case. I fully expect that we are going to start seeing in 6 days on the reporter from the New Republic shared with us in the last hour. The 17th letter of the alphabet is Q. On January 17th, it's going to be happening all over the country. Trump goes on to say, we are looking, or what might be Trump, we are looking at the various federal criminal statutes we will use to charge Nancy Pelosi. Some of the penalties include up to 20 years in prison and in some cases the death penalty. Really? Meanwhile, Representative Lauren Boebert, brand new member of Congress from Colorado, Republican from Colorado, is she had twice. She tweeted, "Today is 1776," during the siege of the Capitol. In other words, she saw it as the revolution, as a good thing. And then she tweeted where Nancy Pelosi was on the floor of the House of Representatives to these people. And then after the speaker left, she tweeted, "The speaker has been removed from the chambers." Live tweeting to wannabe lynchers and murderers and seditionists and traitors the location of our political leaders. I can't imagine anything worse than that. Well, I can. That's pretty bad. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Get your thoughts on all this right after this break. It's 15 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. And welcome back. Alan in Green Bluff, Washington. Hey, Alan, what's on your mind today?
So, Tom, I think your book club just answered my question. It was about, Fox News used to have Hannity and Combs, and there had to be some kind of balance on their opinion. And I didn't know, I knew that they stopped it when some regulation or law was dropped, and you just answered my question on the book club. You said it was 87, there was FCC regulation. Is there anything that could be done to create some kind of balance now?
Well, the Fairness Doctrine, which Reagan suspended in 1987 and Barack Obama took off the books in the last year of his presidency, I think it was 2011, Obama took the Fairness Doctrine off the books, didn't require stations to have balanced programming. What they required was if the ownership of the station expressed an opinion, they had to give equal time to somebody with a different opinion, number one. And number two, the Fairness Doctrine required that radio stations, quote, program in the public interest, which is rather vague. And the FCC interpreted that as meaning you must have actual, real news, as opposed to opinion, at the top of every hour for radio stations and for television stations for at least an hour, half hour of local, half hour of national news during prime time. And those have been established as kind of norms and standards, but the idea that they're all news has just gone out the window. It's largely opinion. But here's the problem, Alan. If we passed a law that said that the federal government has oversight over radio stations, and they can regulate and they can look at the content of my show just like they can the content of Shawn Hannity's radio show, and decide whether it's fair and balanced or not, and decide what we have to do to balance it, I would be very uncomfortable. I would be very uncomfortable with the Trump administration deciding how my show had to be balanced, for example. I think that this is something that has come about as a result, in large part, of massive, extraordinary and massive consolidation of media as a result of the 1996 Telecommunications Act that Bill Clinton signed, which did away with most of the ownership rules for radio and television stations and allowed giant billionaire-owned corporate entities to start slamming these stations together into giant groups. So now you got Sinclair with over 200 stations, you got Clear Channel with about 1,000, you've got Cumulus with about 1,000, and companies that in many cases have nakedly political agendas, or at least preferences. And that's where I think that's where we need to focus our efforts, is stopping these monopolies and going back to local programming. When you've got radio stations that are locally programmed, they tend to respond to local constituencies. And there's not any place in America where there aren't Democrats. I mean, even in Wyoming, there would be a market for progressive talk radio if anybody could put it on the air. But almost all the radio stations in the state are owned by these giant corporations that refuse to run progressive programming. So that's the way to do it. Alan, thank you for the call. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. Picking up your phone calls right after this is the Thom Hartmann Program, defending America from the weapons of mass deception. Stay tuned. The Hartmann Report is a free daily podcast, 7 days a week, and you can find our entire 3-hour podcast over at thomhartmann.com. Hey, we have a new video for supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com. It's about curing type 1 diabetes, which is a pretty amazing thing. Type 1 diabetes is where the cells in the pancreas that produce insulin are actually destroyed. They're gone. Type 1 diabetics, typically it shows up in childhood, and without insulin, people die from it fairly young. With insulin, they can live a good long life, but a University of Alberta researcher, Dr. James Shapiro, back in 1990, pioneered a transplant system. Now, the problem with that was that people had to use immunosuppressive drugs for the rest of their lives because they had just gotten, a partial pancreas transplant from another person. But now he's successfully on mice worked out a way of actually curing type 1 diabetes. We can't do it legally here in the United States, but they're doing it in Canada. It's amazing. You can check it out at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Wow, what a time we are living through. And the next 9 days are going to be so consequential. So consequential. Marion in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hey, Marion, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, thanks a lot. Just saying that the conservative side, I'm follow someone on Facebook here in Raleigh who ran for Congress in the last election and lost. And one of his last posts, he said, "To all my friends who own digital books, please buy hard copies of every important text you have. Mark my words, this won't stop with deplatforming conservatives. Eventually they will come for the source, the ideas themselves." He has 1,000 followers or so, and it's as if they have become the victims, not the aggressors. And he goes on with other things, but it was just to relate.
Victimhood has been a major right-wing selling point all along. They talk about snowflakes and all that kind of stuff on the left, but really the masters of, oh, poor me, have been conservatives for years, right? For years. Yeah. And, whether it's fighting affirmative action or whether it's fighting women's rights or whatever it may be. I mean, this is their shtick. And that's interesting that they're thinking that even the books, although it does tie into my comment to the last caller who was saying right. Shouldn't we pass a fairness doctrine? And I'm saying I don't want the government making these decisions. On the other hand, I don't think that the power to make such decisions should be consolidated in 4 companies either, and that's largely what we have right now with Google, which also owns YouTube, with Facebook, and with Twitter, and well, I guess there's 3 companies, isn't it? I was thinking Google and YouTube is 2. But there is enormous power there, and the ability to
agree more. Yeah,
the ability to deal with this should be more diffuse. Although I'm not,
exactly.
I'm not crying because Parler got taken down or because Trump got deplatformed. But it does highlight something that should be a concern for all of us, progressives as well as conservatives. Keep in mind, any weapon that is used against conservatives can also be used against liberals.
Right.
And vice versa.
Thanks a lot, Tom.
And yeah. Thank you, Marianne, and thanks for the heads up on that. Max in Clackamas, Oregon. Hey, Max, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I hope you're well despite everything, and thanks for being a voice for reason and for being on the air and fighting for it. Hey, you and I are on the same brainwave. You mentioned the 14th Amendment, which, of course, was passed in the wake of the Civil War. I think everybody should Google Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, along with the name Thaddeus Stevens, who was a radical Reconstruction. After the Civil War,
they called themselves Radical Republicans. Actually, Thaddeus Stevens was the leader of that band, and they were the heroes in my mind.
They were the heroes. I mean, I think of him and John Brown are my favorite guys in American history. Well, white guys, anyways. But in any case, I want to talk about that. The failure of Reconstruction, and Andrew Johnson was a Southerner who became president after Lincoln was shot in the head by a racist Southerner. And I think that it's time that we take down all the Confederate statues, all over America. And I think it's time that we have, frankly, just legally and morally, and we must maintain the higher ground. But we have to, conduct a dragnet, a nationwide sweep of people who are avowed members of terrorist organizations like Proud Boys, like the 3%ers, like all these people. I'm parsing my words here, sir.
Max, let me stop you right there. I was on the receiving end of that when I was a teenager in the 1960s when I was in SDS. And we were infiltrated by the FBI. We were infiltrated by the Michigan State Police. They tried to sabotage our operations. I was among a group of 13 people who got arrested on trumped-up charges that really were, hey, you guys are anti-war activists. I've been there. I've seen that. I was in the middle of it. And I don't think that we should be saying, hey, you're a member of the Proud Boys, therefore you're a target. You do go after the people who are advocating violence. You do go after the people who are calling for breaking the law. You do go after the people who are inciting riot and sedition. But I don't think you can go after the organizations. There is still a Nazi party in the United States legally. There's still a communist party in the United States legally.
Can I ask you?
Let's be very careful here. As I said a minute ago, any weapon that can be used against conservatives can also be used against progressives.
Yes, but I just want to bring up one point, and that is the fact that when Germany lost the war, granted, Europe is a different place, but there are no statues to Adolf Hitler. Mein Kampf was outlawed for a long, long time. The Germans, when they lost the war, they made the people, the cities, the civilians, go to the camps and clean them up. The difference between you and SDS and, Weatherman, you were in the right, maybe not with the pipe bombs with Weatherman, but SDS was in the right. And it's time to embolden the people on the right and find the fascists that are frankly members of the military and of the police that Joe Scarborough said, open the freaking door for these guys, Tom.
Yeah, well, I'm with you on that, Max. I'm with you. That's why I'm saying hold individuals responsible, but be careful of group identity stuff. That's what happened in the 60s with us.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's also what happened in the 60s when J. Edgar Hoover decided he was going to take out Martin Luther King Jr. We'll be right back. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten. This is from the introduction. It starts with love, exchange, fellowship. It ends as it begins, in motion, in between various modes of being and belonging, and on the way to new economies of giving, taking, being with and for. And it ends with a ride in a Buick Skylark on a way to another place altogether. Surprising, perhaps, after we have engaged dispossession, debt, dislocation, and violence, but not surprising when you have understood that the projects of fugitive planning and black study are mostly about reaching out to find connection. They are about making common cause with the brokenness of being, a brokenness, I would venture to say, that is also blackness, that remains blackness, and will, despite all, remain broken, because this book is not a prescription for repair. If we do not seek to fix what has been broken, then what? How do we resolve to live with brokenness, with being broke, which is also what Moten and Harney called debt? Well, given that debt is sometimes a history of giving, at other times a history of taking, at all times a history of capitalism, and given that debt also signifies a promise of ownership but never delivers on that promise, we have to understand that debt is something that cannot be paid off. Debt, as Harney puts it, presumes a kind of individualized realization to a naturalized economy that is predicated upon exploitation. Can we have, he asks, another sense of what is owed that does not presume a nexus of activities like recognition and acknowledgement, payment and gratitude? Can debt become a principle of elaboration? Moten links economic debt to the brokenness of being in the interview with Stefan Shukatis, who he acknowledges that some debts should be paid and that much is owed, especially to black people, by white people. And yet he says, I also know that it is
that what it is that is supposed to be repaired is irreparable. It can't be repaired. The only thing we can do is tear this stuff down completely and build something new, end of quote. The undercommons do not come to pay their debts, to repair what has been broken, to fix what has been undone. If you want to know what the undercommons wants, what Moten and Harney want, what black people, indigenous people, queers, and poor people want, what we, the we who cohabit in the space of the undercommons want, it is this. We cannot be satisfied with the recognition and acknowledgement generated by the very system that denies A, that anything was ever broken, and B, that we deserve to be the broken part. So we refuse to ask for recognition, and instead we want to take apart, dismantle, tear down that structure right now. That right now limits our ability to find each other, to see beyond it, and to access the places that we know live outside its walls. We cannot say what new structures will replace the ones we live with yet, because once we have torn stuff down, we will inevitably see more and see differently and feel a new sense of wanting and being and becoming. What we want after the break will be different from what we think we want before the break, and both are necessarily different from the desires that issue from being in the dark. Let's come at this by another path. In the melancholic and visionary 2009 film version of Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, 1963, Max, the small seeker who leaves his room, his home, his family to find the world beyond, finds a world of lost and lonely beasts, and they promptly make him their king. Max is the first king the wild things have had, whom they did not eat, and who did not, in turn, try to eat them. And the beasts are the first grown things that Max has met, who want his opinion, his judgment, and his rule. Max's power is that he is small while they are big. He promises the beasts that he has no plans to eat them, and that this is more than anyone has ever promised them. He promises them that he will find ways through and around, and will slip through the cracks and re-crack the cracks if they fill up. He promises to keep sadness at bay and to make the world with the wild creatures that roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. That Max fails to make the wild things happy or to save them or to make the world with them is less important than the fact that he found them and he recognized in them the end of something and potentially the path to an alternative in his world, or an alternative to his world, excuse me. The wild things were not the utopian creatures of fairy tales. They were the rejected and lost subjects of the world Max had left behind. And because he shuttles between the Oedipal land where his mother rules and the ruined world of the wild, he knows the parameters of the real. He sees what is included and what is left out. And he is now able to set sail for another place, a place that is neither the home he left nor the home to which he wants to return. Moten and Harney want to gesture to another place, a wild place that is not simply the leftover space that limbs real and regulated zones of polite society. Rather, it is a wild place that continuously produces its own unregulated wilderness. The zone we enter through Moten and Harney is ongoing and exists in the present, and as Harney puts it, some kind of demand is already being enacted, fulfilled in the call itself. While describing the riots of London in 2011, Harney suggests that the riots and insurrections do not separate out the request, the demand, and the call. Rather, they enact the one in the other. The book is The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study.
Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Hey, we just put a new video up for supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com, and it's about what would have happened if back in 1941, when we were attacked by the Japanese at Pearl Harbor, what would have happened if Franklin Roosevelt had said, well, you know, Hawaii didn't vote for me, and it's only 2,404 dead people. I mean, that's not so many, right? What's the big deal? Or what would have happened if my dad, who, you know, joined the Army to go fight in World War II, if my dad had said, well, you know, it's only 2,400 people, and I live in Michigan, and they're way over in Hawaii. They're never going to get to Michigan. That's the poison that is spreading in America right now. that we really need to take on. And so anyhow, that's the essence of this, the new video that we just put up. You can find it over at thomhartmann.com, and I think you'll find it fascinating. Thank you for your support. Well, things are happening. Again, the phone number for Congress, should you want to weigh in and share your thoughts with your or any other elected member, is 202-224-3121. It gets you both the House and the Senate. It's the switchboard, the Capitol switchboard. This was just introduced into the House of Representatives. Headline at the top of the New York Times and the Washington Post. This is on the behalf of Mr. Cicilline, Ted Lieu, Mr. Raskin, Mr. Nadler, etc. It's been referred to the Committee on the Judiciary, but if they use a privileged motion, which it looks like they probably will on Wednesday, that means that it just goes right to the floor of the House and it gets voted on. Resolved that Donald John Trump, President of the United States, is impeached for high crimes and misdemeanors, and that the following article of impeachment is exhibited to the United States Senate. And then it goes on to say what that is. The Constitution, this is Article 1, incitement of insurrection. The Constitution provides that the House of Representatives, quote, shall have the sole power of impeachment, end quote, and that the President, quote, shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors, end quote. Further, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution prohibits any person who has, quote, engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the United States from holding any office under the United States, end quote. In his conduct while President of the United States and in violation of his constitutional oath, faithfully to execute the office of President of the United States and to the best of his ability to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, and in violation of his constitutional duty to take care that laws be faithfully executed, Donald John Trump engaged in high crimes and misdemeanors by inciting violence against the government of the United States, in that on January 6, 2021, pursuant to the 12th Amendment of the Constitution of the United States, the Vice President of the United States, the House of Representatives, and the Senate met at the United States Capitol for a joint session of Congress to count the votes of the Electoral College. In the months preceding the joint session, President Trump repeatedly issued false statements asserting that the presidential election results were the product of widespread fraud and should not be accepted by the American people or certified by state or federal officials. Shortly before the joint session commenced, President Trump addressed a crowd at the Ellipse in Washington, D.C. There, he reiterated false claims that we won this election and we won it by a landslide. That's in quotes. He also willfully made statements that, in context, encouraged and foreseeably resulted in lawless action at the Capitol, such as, quote, if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore, end quote. Thus incited by President Trump, members of the crowd he had addressed in an attempt to, among other objectives, interfere with the joint session's solemn constitutional duty to certify the results of the 2020 presidential election, unlawfully breached and vandalized the Capitol, injured and killed law enforcement personnel, menaced members of Congress, the Vice President, and congressional personnel, and engaged in other violent, deadly, destructive, and seditious acts. President Trump's conduct on January 6th followed his prior efforts to subvert and obstruct the certification of the results of the 2020 presidential election. These prior efforts included a phone call on January 2nd, 2021, during which President Trump urged the Secretary of State of Georgia, Brad Raffensperger, to find, quote, enough votes to overturn the Georgia presidential election results, and threatened Secretary Raffensperger if he failed to do so. In all of this, President Trump gravely endangered the security of the United States and its institutions of government. He threatened the integrity of the democratic system, interfered with the peaceful transition of power, and imperiled a co-equal branch of government. He therefore betrayed his trust as president to the manifest injury of the people of the United States. Wherefore, Donald John Trump, by such conduct, has demonstrated that he will remain a threat to national security, democracy, and the Constitution if allowed to remain in office, and has acted in a manner grossly incompatible with self-governance and the rule of law. Donald John Trump thus warrants impeachment and trial, removal from office, and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States. So that just happened. Donald Trump They've filed the articles of impeachment. I believe the vote is going to be on Wednesday. We'll see how this shakes out. So pick up your thoughts on all of this. Mike in Fresno, California. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Hey, I believe that the Capitol Police were set up. ABC News is reporting that the permit for the rally, Donald Trump's rally, was submitted by Women for America First. So
yes, this was Ginny Thomas's group, the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, and she helped pay. She and her group helped pay for about 80 buses to bring people into the rally.
Yeah, but it was filed.
That's the rally that preceded the riot.
Yeah. So the permit, they send the paperwork to the Capitol, and they were expecting 1,000 women, not 1,000 men with flags. And so I think they were completely unprepared for that because
I disagree, Mike.
They got was wrong.
I disagree. Okay. I mean, I could see just from looking at Facebook and Twitter that there was going to be a lot of people coming to Washington, D.C., and they were seriously pissed off, and some of them were calling for violence. I mean, and I'm not, I mean, if I could see that, the FBI could see that, the Capitol Police could see that, they have their own intelligence service, they could figure it out. I believe that, the Capitol Police have been infiltrated by believers of this conspiracy, and that B, Donald Trump instructed his Secretary of Defense to withhold the National Guard from that area and not to provision any kind of federal troops in the area. And then you've got the problem that the city of Washington, D.C. could not send their police in. Muriel Bowser could not do it because that's federal property, and federal property is policed by federal agents. So all of the federal agencies except the Capitol Police were under Donald Trump's control. The Capitol Police are supervised by Congress, but Congress doesn't have day-to-day say over what they do. And so, Congress arguably should have said, get your act together, guys, in advance. And in retrospect, they probably will in the future. But this was not, they didn't get snookered, Mike. If they did, they are the world's greatest idiots, because this was on display for everyone to see. And I think that makes it even worse, far worse. So anyhow, Nils in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Nils, what's up?
Yeah, Tom, I heard you earlier, and it just sent a chill. This business about the Pentagon has put out a press release saying that the attempted takedown of the Constitution was a free speech protest. Is that what you said?
Correct. First Amendment protest.
Yeah. All right, First Amendment protest. Now, there's an important distinction here. I mean, was this coming from somebody like a Trump humper, like Christopher Miller, the acting Secretary of Defense, or one of the other high-level civilian Trump humpers that Trump put in there, or was this coming from the uniformed military? There's a huge thing here.
This was an official release from the Pentagon, an official press release, and it came from the Office of the Secretary of Defense, and it said that Wednesday's events were First Amendment protests. I don't have the entire thing here.
Well, it sounds, from what you just said,
I've got a story about
it. From what you just said, Tom, it sounds to me like it's coming from Christopher Miller and those people who are Trump humpers, who are civilian people at the top in the DOD. It sounds like that, and
it looks that way.
That's kind of to be expected. That's kind of to be expected.
But it
could I say one more thing?
Sure.
Yeah, I took a course when I was at university, read a book by a guy named Hans J. Morgenthau, Politics Among Nations. And one of the main points in that book is that in order to keep the peace among nations, you have to have balance of power. It is the only thing that works long-term consistently. The same applies, I would submit, in a fractured society like we have here, like it or not. And I'm telling you, Tom, if the liberals are not arming up, we are going to have a civil war, because the other side has the guns and they're going to come for us. If we don't understand this, we're making the same mistake the Jews made in Germany in the 30s. So anyway,
I can't speak to that, Nils. I don't think that the United States is on the verge of a civil war. I think that our institutions will hold Civil wars typically happen when government is very weak, typically around the world. But what we were on the verge of, and I think still will be until January 21st, is a coup, is the takeover of the federal government by Donald Trump and his right-wing forces. And again, I don't think that you or me having a gun is going to do anything about that, except that typically when coups like that happen, like when Hitler took over Germany, what did they do? They started looking for people to kill.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
But in that case, the they wasn't just the brown shirts, it was also the government itself, which makes it very problematic. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Jonathan in Portland. Hey, Jonathan, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I want people to remember the name Ryan McCarthy. He is the Secretary of the Army, and he was in the chain of command. He was the man who was delaying the deployment of the National Guard. He had to sign off on them. He was also the same person that deployed Black Hawk helicopters on peaceful demonstrators in Washington, D.C. in the streets in 2019, which sparked a major investigation among the inspector generals of the National Guard and the Army. He's a toady of Trump.
Jonathan, hang on just a second. I think you may have one of those facts wrong. My understanding is that in order for, and I believe Donald Trump's understanding was, that in order for federal forces like the National Guard or any kind of federal force to be deployed to the Capitol building required a sign-off from the Secretary of Defense. And
okay, so
Nancy Pelosi
correct.
was trying to reach the Secretary of Defense, and he never took her call. And instead, she got a call from Ryan, from the Secretary of the Army, who authorized it. Am I wrong?
Well, okay. So in fairness, right?
I mean, I saw her say that on television.
Yeah. In fairness, we only know what we read. ProPublica just did an excellent article explaining the chain of command. It's entitled "Before Mob Stormed the Capitol, Days of Security Planning Involved Cabinet Officials." It was published January 9th. There are other articles, too, to the effect. NPR just did a story, too, about how it was the Army Secretary that was at the top of the chain of command. So it's the Army Secretary, Ryan McCarthy, who was in control of that. And there was a general underneath him that they were speaking with at the time. And that's what I've read. So, that's all I know. Mm-hmm. But I do know that Ryan McCarthy was also at a controversy when peaceful protesters encountered Black Hawk helicopters, 2 helicopters, where the ACLU filed a lawsuit against the National Guard and the Army because they flew down 45 feet from the ground, and the rotor wash broke tree branches. These are tactics that you use in combat. So I'm saying that Ryan McCarthy is someone that we need to look at, and there are people inside that are taking Trump's orders, and that's based on what I've read in NPR, Military Times, Army Times, ProPublica, ACLU.
If your point, Jonathan, is that this is not over, this coup attempt is not over, and they're going to try again, and they're going to try multiple times between now and the 20th of January to prevent Joe Biden from becoming president, if that's your point, and the people inside the Trump administration are aiding and abetting it, I would agree with that.
Well, I don't think there's going to be any more coup attempts. There are 6,000 National Guard being deployed in Washington, D.C. as we speak. They're going to be armed, according to the Military Times. And I think when Trump's out of office, Mr. McCarthy will be gone, along with Mr. Miller, who is the acting defense secretary, who's also a toady, and has his assistant was assistant for Devin Nunes. So it'll go fine. There's no civil war. There's just little proxy wars going on.
Well, let's hope that you're absolutely right, Jonathan. I really and truly do. I really and truly hope that that's the case. I'm not confident that it's the case, but I'm hopeful. We'll be right back. It's 10 minutes before we go. The Hidden History of Monopoly tells how Robert Bork, that guy from the Reagan era, transformed corporate America and destroyed the American dream. So John Kasich was recently on CNN talking about how Democrats need to be listening to rural America, words to that effect. No, I think Democrats need to be talking to rural America and reminding rural America that it was a Democratic president that got them Social Security. It was a Democratic president that brought electricity to rural America, the RTA through, or the REA rather through the Franklin Roosevelt administration. It was the Democratic Party who brought phones to rural America. It was the Democratic Party that brought Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and public education to rural America, subsidized all those things. Democrats don't need to be listening to rural America. They need to be talking to rural America. There's over 1,500 right-wing radio stations in rural America talking smack all the time, 24/7, and none in rural America carrying a progressive message. That's what Democrats need to be paying attention to. You can check out our new video on this over at thomhartmann.com. Wow, what a day, hey? Welcome back. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, not too much, Tom. Yeah, absolutely. Everybody that's involved in what happened at the Capitol needs to be held to account, and I'll tell you why. I think we're on a pretty much unstoppable trajectory towards fascism. And this, I said this even before Donald Trump took office, okay, on another show with another, another host. We are seeing a classic leaderless resistance model in the United States taking place. All right, and rather than belabor the point, okay, in Nazi Germany, how did the Nazis unify everybody? You had to buy into this idea that you were part of a master race. You've known real Nazis. I've known a real Nazi. And here's the thing: on the surface, they seem very reasonable. You know this, Tom, and I know this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
They seem very reasonable and decent people, but the problem is they have bought into something that is very, very monolithic, very linear, and all the power flows to the top. All right, and then everyone shares in that. In the case of Nazi Germany, it was a master race. What we have now in the 21st century, I believe, is the emergence of these master political class. I'm calling it the master political class. And you're seeing these huge parties like the BJP party in India. You're seeing the United Russia party in Russia, in the Commonwealth of Independent States. And I think America is completely poised for a master class party to emerge. And in Donald Trump, we're focused on him, but it is leaderless, you see. Many Trump supporters said during the riot, they said, look, we don't care about Donald Trump. Because, look, here's the deal. Pompeo, no one's paying attention to Pompeo. Pompeo has laid the groundwork to where we are almost inevitably going to be fascists. He is way more competent than Trump. What Pompeo is doing with Taiwan, for instance, and also Kim Jong-un, what Kim Jong-un said in North Korea. Look, North Korea and China have the exact same problem. They have American proxies at their borders. The problem is we, as an agent of those proxies, we are incompetent. We are inept now. All right. So what they're doing is they're turning towards, China is going to turn towards more authoritarianism. I'm talking about mainland China. They can't have two Chinas. They can't have two Chinas, you see. The bulk of the population is on the mainland. They're going to turn more towards corporate fascism. All right. And then that is inevitably going to pull, North Korea also. Donald Trump gave Kim Jong-un legitimacy, you see. All right. For the first time, he gave Kim Jong-un the greatest gift ever. No wonder Kim Jong-un is lamenting Trump's troubles, okay? But my point is, Tom...
So, please go to the point.
Well, the point is we have got to... all right, we cannot allow this master political class to emerge. All right? Donald Trump, if he does it... if he...
Don't you think it already has? Don't you think that that's what Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley were trying to do on Wednesday?
Yes, and Ted Cruz uses... Myers-Briggs, personality thing when he tries to get followers. All right, and what he's going to do is he's going to find these people that are more comfortable just based on their core personalities. They're more comfortable with authoritarianism. Look, you've gone over this time and time again, Tom, so I don't need to rehash it. The bottom line is we have to remember we have to remember what kind of resistance we are. All right, we are we got to look at, and I'm an atheist, so I shouldn't even be saying this, but the bottom line is we got to look at liberation theology. We've got to stay true to our kairos, who we are. Like all these people that want to emulate, like they want to just win, they want to get guns, and we got to fight back. Is that who we are? Like a person that is facing a terminal disease knows this as well as I know this. Okay, you've got to live your life who you are.
I've got it, Dave. I've got it. You know, and we're starting to go down a rabbit hole here. Thank you. A lot to think about there. Bob in Middletown, New York. You got the last minute, Bob. What's up?
Hi, Tom. I'm just curious of your thoughts about seditious conspiracy versus incitement of insurrection for the article of impeachment.
Well, you could have both, but they chose to go with incitement of insurrection because they were the victims of it, I believe.
I've seen an op-ed by Clark D. Cunningham in Politico over the weekend. He's making the argument it's easier to convict and make the case for seditious conspiracy, which also has a twice as much penalty, and it would be easier, and they wouldn't be able to wiggle out of the charge of incitement of insurrection. Also, Letitia James was pushing for this also.
Yeah, we can Monday morning quarterback the House of Representatives all day long, but they've done what they've done, and I think it's really important that people call their representatives at 202-224-3121 and weigh in, because I guarantee that's happening. You know, right-wing radio stations all over the country are asking their listeners to call in right now too. 202-224-3121. Get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We will see you tomorrow, same time, same place, as the attempted survival of our American Republic continues. Have a great day. We'll be back.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Plexiderm, real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. Gabby takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at gabby.com/Tom. HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at hellofresh.com, code TOM. And Superbeats, heart chews for heart healthy energy. More info at superbeatsradio.com/Tom.